Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51 Interrogation. A qualified king should not deal with such a lowly criminal in person, Your Majesty. However, the old knight stood in front of the map table and heard Viserys' request, frowned slightly, and then spoke. He will stain your hands. He didn't know why Viserys wanted to deal with the traitor personally, but such behavior could be done by anyone, but it seemed a little inappropriate for a king. It might even affect the king's honor. And Viserys was only an 8-year-old child. How old was Joffrey when he killed the person? He forgot. But it seemed to be 16 or 17 years old. He drew his sword and killed a person in the street on impulse, and his chest was stained with blood. At that time, his palms were shaking. He practiced swordsmanship hard every day, but after killing the person, he couldn't even hold the sword. Since then, Joffrey left his family, his hometown, and even the land. He was unwilling to return to Westeros, and even more unwilling to mention the past. And how old was Viserys when he did all this? Although the boy still panics when facing the threat of death, he can take the life of an enemy without changing his expression and sentence a person to death without blinking. Although maturity is a good thing for a young king with a bad fate. After all, Viserys has a heavy burden on his shoulders, shouldering the responsibility of restoring his country and family. He doesn't even have the power to be kind to his enemies, because that would be cruel to himself. However, Sir Joffrey is still very afraid that Viserys will become a bloodthirsty tyrant in the future. Just like his father, the Mad King. Few kings in history have been given such a title. In fact, the young king is very lucky. In addition to leaving him an astonishing tangible wealth on Dragonstone, the Targaryen surname has also accumulated an intangible spiritual treasure for him. His mother Queen Rhaela, Maester Daniel, Sir William Derry, the instructor of the Red Castle, including the fleet commander in front of him, Sir Joffrey, and many soldiers who are still loyal to Targaryen, etc. These people will give Viserys help and guidance at critical moments to help him overcome difficulties and prevent him from going astray. Viserys stood in front of the chair and was silent for a moment after hearing the old knight's words. Although he deeply trusted this old man, he felt that some things were better hidden in his heart. He had no way to explain the black mist and the Valyrian text to Sir Joffrey, and he couldn't explain it clearly now. After all, Viserys himself didn't know what this black mist was, and what the unclear connection between it and Valyrian civilization was. But there was one thing he knew at the moment. That was that it needed life, and Viserys needed to end it with his own hands, and there must be a medium to connect with each other. Long-range weapons such as bows and crossbows and indirect killing of enemies were not allowed. Then he would extract something from the body of the killed, turning it into a black mist, and then merged into the whole black mist to strengthen himself. Sir. After some hesitation, Viserys slightly organized his words, and raised his head again to explain. I'm not going to execute a criminal personally, and I'm not indulging in the pleasure of killing. Viserys looked at the old man in front of the map table, with calmness in his beautiful lavender eyes. It's for Maester Daniel and the many innocent soldiers who died in this rebellion. They all died to protect me, so I must seek justice for them. Viserys' tone was a little uncertain at first, but in the end he became calmer and calmer, even looking directly into the old knight's eyes. It's not that he's getting better at lying, but that he recognized the reasons he found. He should seek justice for these innocent people. From the poisoning of the old Maester a few months ago, to the mercenaries from Essos who sneaked into the castle, to the tragic death of the 2 guards outside the door just now, including the guards who stood beside him and never backed down from beginning to end. Viserys felt that he should do something. When Sir Joffrey heard Viserys' words, he hesitated a little. He could tell that there was something untrue in the little king's words, but the final firm tone made him waver. Queen Rhaela was dead, and the Maester died earlier. The old knight felt that he should play the role of a strict father and must not let Viserys go astray. That would not only be a disservice to the queen and the Maesters, but also to the prince he once followed, the Duke of Dragonstone, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. The reason why the Dragonstone fleet and the Old Knight can still firmly follow the Targaryen family's royal flag is because of the prince's outstanding personality charm. But now they seem to have another reason, at least for the Old Knight. That is to cultivate Viserys' growth. The decisiveness, bravery, and wisdom shown by Prince Rhaegar's younger brother, as well as his amazing progress after knowing the second prince, all these made Sir Geoffrey feel hopeful. In the future, Targaryen will regroup and lead the army across the sea to conquer the Seven Kingdoms again, and trample Westeros under his feet. In that case, the Old Knight stood in front of the map table and looked at Viserys, then took off the helmet with a metallic luster on his head, which was still stained with blood. Although the Old Knight was already in his 60s, the muscles under the armor were still very strong. He even killed a rebel with his own hands just now. Sir Geoffrey took off his helmet, revealing his grey head, then held the helmet with one hand and placed his palm on the breastplate, nodding slightly. "I'm willing to do it for you, Your Majesty." After Sir Geoffrey finished his salute, he waved his hand and ordered his soldiers to drag away the acting Lord of Dragonstone, who was only breathing out but not breathing in. Find someone to treat him, keep him alive first, and don't let him die so soon. He still needs the information from this Dornishman. Then he left without looking back. Viserys stood in front of the throne and saw the Old Knight's actions. He was slightly stunned, then took a deep breath. He wanted to say something, but didn't say it in the end. Once, the most urgent problem facing Viserys was how he should receive the legacy left by his brother Rhaegar. Because he only had a Targaryen surname, but he was only an 8-year-old child. This is an age that will be looked down upon and difficult to win respect. What ability does he have to make these soldiers who once followed his brother obey his orders? But now the matter seems to have been resolved. Sir Geoffrey has just shown his willingness to support him. Chapter 52 Hallucinogens. At noon the next day, a ray of bright sunlight shone into the house from the window, leaving a square spot of light on the floor and a layer of fine dust floating above. The sound of the waves outside was surging, constantly hitting the rocks, and it seemed that it would never stop. The fisherman's singing was far away, but it had become inaudible when it reached the castle. Groups of white seagulls landed on the top of the castle, looking into the distance. Everything was over. War, storm, rebellion. Only in the cracks of the castle's stone slabs could one detect a trace of the fighting before dawn today. The surviving soldiers and servants in the castle were busy cleaning the remaining blood and human tissue in these cracks. Wow. The soldiers carried a bucket of cold water to wash down, and the water continued to flow down the stairs. Then the servants rushed up and rubbed it hard with rags. "Here, clean them up." Sophia, the old maid who had followed him from the Red Keep to Dragonstone, became the leader of the servants, directing them to clean the castle. In the midst of the busy cleaning, Viserys finally woke up slowly from the bed, raised one hand to rub his sleepy eyes, and his long silver gold hair was a little messy, curling and covering the boy's beautiful eyes. The boy sat on the bed and opened his arms, stretched slightly, and then yawned again. So sleepy. Viserys wanted to lie down and take another nap, but unfortunately Rhaenys didn't allow him to be so lazy. Bang bang bang. Viserys was awakened by the violent banging on the door outside, just as he was about to lie down. The sleepiness in his mind disappeared without a trace, and he became extremely awake. "Hey, Viserys, it's time to get up. The sun is about to shine on your butt." The girl's crisp and sweet voice came from outside the door. Last night, she was arranged by Viserys to move to another place in advance and did not experience this fight. In fact, the attention of these traitors is on Viserys, the heir of the Targaryen family. He is a boy, and naturally a thorn in the eyes of Baratheon. Damn it. When Viserys heard the lively voice outside the door, he felt a slight headache. Rhaenys is lively and cute, with a lively personality. Although she is young, she has a little sign of being a devil. Without her mother's discipline, Rhaenys is becoming more and more lawless. Viserys will not care about her, and no one in the entire Dragonstone castle can control this little princess. Then Viserys responded, and then sat on the bed, and put on the cumbersome and gorgeous clothes step by step. In fact, Queen Leela wanted to arrange a maid for Viserys to help him dress and bathe, but Viserys refused. He only wants to live alone in his own room, and then lock the door from the inside, so that Viserys will feel safe and sleep more peacefully and sweetly. and Viserys is not used to others helping him put on his clothes, even though he is only an 8-year-old boy, and that part is just a very mini and cute little thing. But he still has a strong sense of privacy and refuses to be seen by these old women. So Viserys' daily life is done by him alone. The boy stood in front of the silver-plated round mirror, and a black fog gradually spread, but Viserys ignored the other party calmly, still looking at the mirror and adjusting his collar. This mysterious black fog has been with Viserys for more than half a year. Viserys has been used to it from the initial fear, curiosity, and exploration. He ignores the other party and calmly adjusts his collar. However, this black fog is still rolling slowly, and the black smoke that escapes dissipates in the air, revealing a mysterious and weird atmosphere. Others can't see the black fog that appears in Viserys' vision at all. Then the boy's eyes left the silver mirror, turned around and left the bedroom, and the black mist behind him kept rolling and slowly dissipated. "Hey, why did you get up so late today?" As soon as Viserys came out, the little brown-haired girl pouted and hugged his arm and complained. Because she was not in Dragonstone last night, Rhaenys didn't know what happened last night, and naturally had no way of knowing why Viserys got up so late. Because when it was dawn, Viserys had just dealt with all the things, and had time to return to the bedroom, to untie his leather armor, and go to bed. "Your Majesty, Lord Joffrey is waiting for you in the hall." A guard guarding outside saw Viserys, bowed his head slightly and saluted, then spoke. Then seeing Viserys' eyes shifted over, the guard glanced at Rhaenys, and added in a low voice, "It is said that there are some clues about what happened last night." Viserys was slightly stunned, and then his expression became clear. He understood what the guard meant. It should be the bastard who was captured last night. His mouth had been pried open. Sir Joffrey thought he had obtained relatively important information from him, so he hurried over to tell him. "Go to the picture table hall." After Viserys woke up, he handed Rhaenys to the guards. He didn't want the girl to be exposed to these things too early. After all, the incident half a year ago was still a psychological shadow for Rhaenys. As an uncle, Viserys would naturally try his best to spread his wings and protect Rhaenys' safety. Then the little king strode to the picture table hall. Not long after, Viserys came here and met the old knight who had been waiting for a long time, and then he got a shocking news from the other party. "What?" Hearing this news, Viserys was slightly stunned and a little unbelievable. "Sir, do you mean that this despicable bastard once gave me and my mother a lot of hallucinogens? Last night, Sir Joffrey brought David Sand back to the camp like a dead dog, and then hung his life and interrogated him overnight." The other party seemed to have given up hope of survival and told everything he knew in one breath. The acting Lord of Dragonstone had bribed the chef to put a lot of hallucinogens in the food of Queen Rhaela and Viserys. The illegitimate son hoped to kill them silently in this way without attracting anyone's attention. After all, with the Mad King as a precedent, it is natural that there are crazy genes in the blood of the Targaryen family, and Queen Rhaela's later state was obviously the effect of hallucinogens. As for Viserys, even this traitor didn't understand why. He even increased the dosage of hallucinogens to a large amount, but Viserys still didn't feel anything unusual. It turned out to be like this. Chapter 53 Execution. That's right. The old knight was not wearing armor today, but only a grey robe, and his face was slightly gloomy, and then he nodded. So, Viserys paced in front of the throne in a daze, his eyes slightly out of focus. He recalled the last time he saw his mother. At that time, Queen Rhaela's mental state was very bad. She often had hallucinations and auditory hallucinations, and then went crazy for no reason, yelling, angry or crying. At that time, Viserys thought that his mother was slightly mentally disturbed because of her pregnancy, coupled with a series of stimulations she had experienced before. However, now it seems that all this is very likely man-made. Mother shouldn't have died. Really, sir? Viserys stopped abruptly, then turned his head and asked the old knight standing next to him. Sir Joffrey's face was gloomy, and he didn't answer Viserys' question, as if he had acquiesced. Queen Rhaela should not have died. Although the woman suffered a series of blows, she was very strong. She had been married to the Mad King for so many years, and had been abused countless times, but had not been tortured crazy. How could she suddenly collapse and become insane at this time? and Viserys tried hard to recall what would happen in the future if the original trajectory was followed. The real Viserys' mental state was also slowly becoming abnormal, with a bad temper and a twisted mind. Even the gentle Daenerys would burst into madness after being stimulated. So, is that the case? Viserys stood there motionless, staring blankly at the sky and the sea behind the chair. He should have thought of it long ago. However, he did not think of it. Viserys and Queen Rhaella both took hallucinogens and became crazy and irritable under the influence of hallucinogens, and Daenerys in her mother's womb might have been affected by a little potion. However, now, Viserys was also given a large amount of hallucinogens by the acting Lord of Dragonstone, but Viserys did not show symptoms of madness. He just occasionally had some symptoms of hallucinations. For example, last night, sitting on the Conqueror's throne in the table hall, looking at the map of Westeros, following the route that Eagle-Eye had taken, and recalling the story about this war that the old Maester had told him. In the end, the shadow of this war appeared vaguely in his mind, as if he had really seen it in person. Now I think it's probably the hallucinogens that played a role, and Viserys fell into his own fantasy. But it is also obvious that Viserys took more hallucinogens than Queen Rhaella, but this poison does not seem to have a great effect on Viserys. Viserys only had some mild auditory and visual hallucinations, and did not have a mental disorder like his mother. The old knight stood by the throne and watched Viserys standing there in a daze, and he felt a little bit reluctant in his heart. This situation is indeed cruel. If Queen Rhaella died of dystocia, it might be acceptable, but she shouldn't have died. It shouldn't even be like that, but because someone tarnished the honor, using such a despicable method as poisoning a pregnant woman and her child, it led to such an ending. The old knight's grey hair was blown by the wind, and he took a deep breath. He wanted to tear the despicable usurper into pieces. But now there is something more important. Your Majesty. There was silence in the table hall, and after a long silence, the old knight finally broke the silence and said, "Perhaps you should find a doctor to diagnose your current physical condition. There are no Maesters on Dragonstone Island anymore, and ordinary people cannot get the care of Maesters like nobles and rich people, so they can only turn to local doctors and midwives and their knowledge of herbs. The medical skills on the continent of Westeros are actually not very good. This also shows how precious it is that the old Maester could live to the age of 80. They can boil herbs for ordinary diseases and wounds, or apply them externally. As for sword wounds, some extreme methods are used to disinfect them, such as boiling water, mirish fire or fire milk to clean, and the latter two are directly burned on the wound. If the wound has begun to rot, maggots can be used to eat the rotten limbs, and then bandage them. If necessary, suturing the wound can also be done, and ointments containing mustard seeds, nettles and baker's yeast can be applied to the wound to prevent infection. But these must be used together with poppy milk and similar drugs such as sleeping wine, to play a role in paralysis and pain relief. If there is no poppy milk, physical coma must be used. Of course, such means are generally not used, unless in extreme cases. And these are all for the treatment of diseases and wounds. For Viserys' current situation, there is only one other means. That is bloodletting. Bachelors and doctors believe that, if you are poisoned, the venom must be removed from the body, and you should cut wherever you need to. If the venom has penetrated into the blood, you need to bleed. When the venom is released from the body, the pure blood will fill the original position again, so that the poison can be detoxified. Viserys heard what Sir Geoffrey said, and his cheek twitched slightly, as if he thought of a very bad memory in the past, and then he refused directly and decisively. "No need, sir. I feel very well now. There is no need to bother the doctor." Then, without giving Sir Geoffrey a chance to continue speaking, Viserys changed the subject and spoke again. "I think you know very well. Only drunkards, bastards and women from the free trade cities would use poison as a weapon." Viserys looked directly into Sir Geoffrey's eyes, anger burning in his eyes, and the old sergeant didn't know why he was a little uneasy when he was looked at by these lavender eyes. "Likewise, I know you think that a fair king should not abuse punishment privately, even if he is a sinner that the seven gods have already determined. But I don't want you to stop me next time." Then Viserys brushed past the old sergeant and strode down from the main seat. At the same time, his left hand grasped the hilt of the sword tied to his waist, and the other hand pulled out the short sword that was only slightly longer than the dagger. Clang, because there is something I must do myself next. The sharp dagger, the blade flashed with cold light. Viserys tightly grasped the hilt, his face cold and without any warmth. The bastard, who was tied up and lying on the ground, saw the cute silver-haired boy approaching. A look of fear appeared in his eyes. Chapter 54 Bravus. Viserys personally ended the life of this illegitimate child. Blood spilled on the ground, and the round table hall was filled with a pungent smell of blood. Several guards slightly turned their eyes away. Some of them couldn't bear to look directly. Then, the silent Sir Geoffrey winked, and 2 guards pinched their noses and walked forward to drag the body away. Along the way, a long blood trail was dragged on the ground, and the servants also came up with buckets to wash the blood on the ground. After Viserys killed this man with his own hands to avenge his mother, he took a deep breath, and the black mist was quietly sucked into his body, still not noticed by others. Then he turned around. The old maid stood by the stone pillar. It was ridiculous that several soldiers present were scared away by the scene in front of them and didn't want to look at it anymore. But this woman witnessed the whole scene. Because the other party killed Queen Leela, the little girl who was once kind and lively. Now it's just blood debt. The old maid in a grey robe and a scarf wrapped around her head spat fiercely, then saw Viserys turn around and quickly took out a clean handkerchief from her sleeve, put it on her sleeve and walked forward. Your Majesty. Viserys slightly tilted his head to look at the old maid, who had followed them all the way from the Red Castle, and had also experienced countless hardships. Thank you, Sophia. Viserys nodded slightly, then took the handkerchief from the old maid's sleeve and gently wiped the blood off his hands. At this time, a guard walked in from outside the door, then leaned over slightly, and whispered a few words in Viserys' ear. What? When Viserys heard what the guard said, a trace of surprise appeared on his cheek. Then he returned the blood-stained handkerchief to the old maid, turned around and looked at the guard standing beside him, and asked again seriously. You mean there is a merchant ship from Bravus, and there is a person claiming to be a Bravus envoy? The guard heard Viserys repeat the question, and then nodded hurriedly. Yes. This. The little king's face suddenly looked a little strange. Bravus. Of course he knew where Bravus was. This city was the most special and powerful city-state among the free trade cities on the other side of the narrow sea. It was often called the Secret City or the Bastard of Valyria. It was composed of a series of islands at the northwestern end of the Essos continent, right where the narrow sea and the Shivering Sea meet. He was not surprised that a merchant ship from Bravus would stop here. After all, Dragonstone blocked the entrance to Blackwater Bay. Merchant ships from the free trade cities had to pass through here if they wanted to have trade exchanges with King's Landing. In fact, the Targaryen fleet did not block the entire Blackwater Bay because that would only cause negligible damage to King's Landing, but would attract too many enemies for Targaryen. However, he was a little surprised that Bravus would suddenly send an envoy to visit. Dragonstone and Bravus were separated by the narrow sea, and the distance was thousands of miles, and there was no contact before. Why would they suddenly send an envoy? Could he be a liar? Such a thought flashed through Viserys' mind. It was not that the boy was suspicious by nature, but that too many things had happened recently, which made him a little suspicious. Everyone seemed to be a liar, a traitor, or an assassin. Why not let him in first, and listen to what this envoy from Bravus wants to say? Your Majesty. And Sir Geoffrey, who was standing next to the main seat of the picture table hall, suddenly spoke. He had just heard the conversation between Viserys and the guards, and knew that a envoy from Bravus had arrived. He was also a little curious about what the other party came with, and Viserys hesitated slightly in the hall, and finally nodded. In that case, then ask him to come over first. Yes, Your Majesty. The guard agreed and then retreated. Then Viserys led everyone down the stone drum tower, and came to the hall on the lowest floor. This is the place to meet important guests. Viserys attaches great importance to the envoys from Bravus. At this moment, the boy sat on the cold stone throne. The sun shone through on both sides, and sprinkled on the ground, illuminating the dust. The silver-haired boy sat on the throne and slightly tidied his clothes, and put on the crown that his mother, Queen Rhaella, had crowned him. The crown was made of pure gold, and a huge ruby was inlaid in the middle. The crown reflected the scorching light in the sun, like a flame burning in the boy's brow. Sir Geoffrey, the commander of the Dragonstone fleet, sat beside the throne with his head raised, his hands naturally hanging on his knees, his grey hair a little messy, quietly waiting for the arrival of the envoys from Bravos. Not too long passed. Rumble, the door of the Dragonstone castle hall was pushed open by the guards. The little king sitting on the throne looked towards the door with a pair of lavender eyes, while the guards who pushed open the door retreated to the sides, revealing the people standing behind them. This was a middle-aged man wearing a grey-brown coat, wearing deerskin boots on his feet, wearing a string of wooden beads on his hands, with a square face and dark hair. Behind this middle-aged man in a grey-brown robe was a young swordsman wearing black clothes and a narrow and thin sword tied around his waist. His hair was a little messy, and he looked a little unkempt, but his eyes were particularly sharp, as if they could see through people's hearts. In Bravos, only assassins wear gaudy clothes. While Viserys was looking up and down at the two people, the old knight sitting next to him leaned forward slightly and explained in his ear in a low voice. When Geoffrey was young, he left his family and hometown because of killing people and wandered around. He once went to the continent of Essos alone and worked as a mercenary, a sailor, and even a waiter in a tavern. Bravos was also a place where he had wandered before, so he was naturally very familiar with the customs there. The truly wealthy and powerful swordsmen and faceless men often wear black and dark clothes. The officials of Bravos, spoon keepers and judges, often wear monotonous grey-brown coats. Viserys heard what the old knight whispered in his ear, and he did not turn his head but nodded silently, looking at the two people standing at the bottom of the steps in front of him. The Bravos envoy at the bottom of the steps also raised his head to observe the little king sitting on the throne. Then he bowed slightly, and took the initiative to speak. Your Majesty, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Personal Letter. However, Viserys sat on the cold throne and did not speak in a hurry. The ruby on the crown on the boy's head, like a flame, reflected light slightly, and his pair of lavender eyes were still looking at the two people standing below. The atmosphere in the hall was slightly quiet. The guards of Dragonstone on both sides held their spears tightly, and their eyes were fixed on the two people standing in the hall who claimed to be the messengers of Bravos. As long as Viserys gave an order, they could rush up and take the two people on the spot. In their opinion, since they were messengers, they must be wearing gorgeous clothes, unlike the two people in front of them. One was dressed in a monotonous grey-brown, while the other was dressed in black clothes and cloak like an assassin, and there was a thin and small toy like a female longsword on his waist. This special weapon was not practical in the eyes of the soldiers of Westeros, and in the center of the hall, the two people being watched by everyone seemed very calm. The envoy in the grey-brown robe had a calm expression, and his eyes were still looking at Viserys, while the warrior behind him had one hand on the hilt of his sword. The atmosphere in the hall froze. Viserys did not speak. He was observing the two people, and at the same time trying to figure out their identities, hoping to find some flaws. And not too long after, the envoy from Bravos was the first to lose. He didn't know why he felt pressure when he looked at this little king who had lost the Iron Throne and was in exile. He was obviously just an 8-year-old child. Your Majesty. The middle-aged man in a grey-brown robe couldn't help but bow slightly again and took the initiative to speak. We are from Bravos, and we have come to see your Majesty under the order of Lord Seeking, and to hand over a handwritten letter from Lord Seeking. The accent and words of the envoy from Bravos were a little weird, which made everyone present a little uncomfortable. However, Viserys seemed very calm, looking at the other party with a sharp gaze. Handwritten letter? He heard that this person was going to hand over a handwritten letter from the Seeking of Bravos, and only then did he slightly believe the other party's identity, but he still needed to read the letter before he could judge. However, he still had something to say at the moment, so he was not in a hurry to read the handwritten letter. Viserys sat on the throne, stroking the cold armrest with one hand, then leaned forward slightly, to adjust his sitting posture, the crown on his head reflecting the light in the sun, and then spoke. The messenger can just speak Valyrian. I understand. He knew that, although Bravos was not a member of the Valyrian freehold, it was indeed a city-state established by refugees who escaped from Valyrian slavery about 500 years before Aegon's landing, so their mother tongue was also Valyrian. As the heir of the Targaryen family, Viserys was naturally very familiar with Valyrian, so as fellow countrymen there was no need for the two sides to speak the common language of Westeros. Moreover, the common language spoken by the envoy from Bravos was really difficult to understand, which made Viserys feel uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I'm rude. The envoy from Bravos was surprised and happy when he heard Viserys speak fluent Valyrian. He was happy because he didn't need to speak in the obscure common language of Westeros anymore. He was surprised because he didn't know if Viserys heard him when he was quietly complaining to the swordsman next to him. Otherwise, he would probably be dragged out and executed, and even if it was reported back to the Sea King, it would be his own fault. He thought that the Targaryen family had already abandoned the Valyrian language and used the common language of Westeros for almost 300 years since they conquered Westeros. After all, even Aegon I converted to the Seven Gods after the War of Conquest. However, the fact was that the envoy had not come into contact with members of the Targaryen family and was a little uninformed. The Targaryens did not give up the Valyrian language, but Viserys did not hear what he just muttered quietly below. After all, the throne was so far away and his ears were not very good. The boy looked at the two messengers and continued to speak. You two, tell me your names. Hearing Viserys' words, the messenger in the grey-brown robe, who was leading the group, slightly straightened his face and saluted again. Your Majesty, my name is Cleon Meisner, and I'm an alderman of Bravos. The alderman is mainly responsible for conveying the decrees of the Sea King of Bravos to manage the city, and can be regarded as the Sea King's assistant in terms of governance. Then the messenger named Cleon turned around and introduced the swordsman beside him. His name is Syrioful, and he is the personal guard of the Sea King and the chief swordsman of Bravos. The black-robed swordsman standing behind Cleon also bowed slightly after the other party introduced him and spoke for the first time. Your Majesty. Viserys felt that the name of the black-robed swordsman sounded a little familiar. Syrioful? He always felt that he had heard this name somewhere, but he seemed to be unable to remember it for a moment. Sir Geoffrey, who was sitting next to him, thought that Viserys did not know what the position of the chief swordsman was, so he whispered in his ear again. Your Majesty, I have heard of this man's name. Syrioful, as the chief swordsman of Bravos, can be considered the best swordsman in Bravos at the moment. These people, they have extraordinary insight, and protecting the safety of the Sea King is their greatest responsibility. Viserys tilted his head and nodded slightly after listening. In fact, there was no need for the old knight to remind him. He seemed to remember who this person was. At this time, Cleon below touched his arms, then took out a letter and held it in his palms with both hands, looking respectful, and then spoke again. This is the handwritten letter from the Sea King to Your Majesty. A guard standing on one side of the hall stepped forward, took the letter from the messenger, and checked it to see if it was poisoned or tampered with in any other way. Then he walked to the throne on the steps and handed it to Viserys. Viserys reached out and took the handwritten letter from the Sea King of Bravos from the guard's hand. He was actually a little curious about what this Sea King who didn't interfere with other people's business wanted to say to him. Swish, then the boy tore open the letter in his hand. Chapter 56 In-Laws. Viserys tore open the envelope, pulled out the contents, and then unfolded them to look. Ferragon Talion is the current Sea King. The Sea King of Bravos is the ruler of the free trade city of Bravos. His personal guard is called the Chief Swordsman of Bravos. The somewhat messy-haired Syrioful standing below holds such an important position. The current Sea King of Bravos, Ferragon Talion, lives in the Sea King's palace in the city. The title of Sea King is not hereditary. After the death of the previous Sea King, the new Sea King will be selected from all citizens by the governor and the keykeeper of Bravos according to a mysterious and puzzling process. Once selected as the Sea King, he will serve for life until his death. The letter that Viserys is holding now is a handwritten letter from Ferragon Talion. The content of the letter is not very long, and it expresses only a simple purpose. Moreover, Viserys can see that the timeliness of this letter seems to be a little expired. This letter from Farragantalion was written before Viserys and the Targaryen fleet set out on an expedition to Storm's End. After all, Bravos is thousands of miles away from Dragonstone. When the Sea King got the news of the naval battle, it was too late to take back the letter. Moreover, this letter was not written to him, but was written in his name. After all, after Viserys was crowned, he was a wandering king who had a claim to the Iron Throne in a certain sense, and his bloodline was pure and legally impeccable. But in fact, this letter was written to his mother, Queen Rhaella. In the letter, the Sea King of Bravos persuaded Rhaella to take Viserys to abandon Dragonstone and live in Bravos. Bravos will provide active protection and blessing to the descendants of the Dragon King, which is a more elegant term for political asylum. At the same time, the Sea King also implicitly stated in the letter that at certain critical times he might consider supporting Targaryen's just claim for the Iron Throne of Westeros. The whole handwritten letter was written in Valyrian. It seemed that the Sea King had more accurate information than the messenger. However, Viserys remained calm when he read the nonsense in the letter. Bravos might really need this poor widow and orphan, but it was definitely not for the reasons of justice and legality as written in the letter. Orys Baratheon, the first prime minister after the War of Conquest, was the illegitimate brother of Aegon in ancient rumors, and also had Targaryen blood. However, these were just rumors, without any concrete evidence, and illegitimate children did not have the legal right of succession. The legal basis for Robert Baratheon to ascend the Iron Throne was his grandmother's blood. Robert's grandmother was Laelly Targaryen, the daughter of Aegon V, so as a Targaryen relative, he had the conditions to ascend the Iron Throne. Therefore, Robert was more legitimate than the people of the Arryn family, the Tully family or the Stark family. Viserys ignored the nonsense above, but he noticed that a person was mentioned at the end of the handwritten letter. In the letter, Farragantalion invited Queen Rhaella and Prince Viserys to Bravos, and then secretly arranged for a mysterious person to meet Queen Rhaella and Viserys. The identity mentioned was a word similar to in-law in Valyrian, indicating a relative of the woman's family. Viserys' Valyrian was enough for daily communication, but after leaving the Red Castle, it was inevitable that he became unfamiliar without such a communication environment. He carefully pondered the meaning of the Sea King's words, and then read it over and over again, and seemed to have a slight understanding. This was because he looked at the letter from a different perspective. Viserys had always looked at the letter from his own perspective, and did not understand it for a while. Then now he realized that, if he looked at the letter from Queen Rhaella's perspective, the meaning of this sentence would be very easy to understand. Queen Rhaella's in-law. Queen Rhaella has 3 children, Viserys and Daenerys. One is still a child and the other is even a baby. Only the eldest brother Rhaegar is married. Although a lot of messy things happened later, the in-laws must not refer to the Stark family in the north. Dawn. Viserys understood slightly, and the knot between his eyebrows loosened a little. Dawn actually wants to contact his mother? Viserys knew that the Iron Throne was negotiating with Dawn. In fact, because of the tricky operations of his father Aerys and his brother Rhaegar, Dawn had already been alienated from the Targaryens. But at this juncture, Dawn actually contacted Bravos to act as a matchmaker, and Bravos, as a middleman, didn't know why he agreed to secretly arrange a meeting between Dawn and Targaryens. But, hasn't their Iron Bank already loaned money to the Iron Throne during this period? Aren't they afraid that they won't be able to get the money back? Or, they want to use this to make a fuss, manipulate the war to make the Iron Throne owe them more money. Viserys thought about the whole thing carefully. Or maybe, Bravos simply doesn't want the 7 kingdoms across the narrow sea to truly reunify and cause them a little trouble. This is a little subtle. Viserys' brows relaxed, and he fell into deep thought while holding the letter in his hand. He didn't know what stage the negotiations between Dawn and the Iron Throne had reached. He didn't know what Dawn's real attitude was, whether it was truly reconciling with the Iron Throne or just pretending. And now Dawn took the initiative to contact Targaryen, because it was the intention of Prince Doran, or was it just a group of people in the Mount family who were dissatisfied with this peace talk and secretly carried out the move? He knew nothing about it. Viserys understood Dawn's cautiousness very well. After all, they were now negotiating with the Iron Throne. If they sent a ship directly to Dragonstone, then the negotiations would not have to go on, and Westeros would have been at war again. However, the letter showed more than that. If Viserys understood correctly, the letter meant that Queen Rhaella should take him to Bravos to meet with the people from Dorne. It specifically pointed out that the Targaryen and the Malt family were still relatives. Then he used a name that was closer to each other, indicating that it was relatives of the woman. Viserys held the letter in his hand and suddenly had a bad feeling. Does the Malt family have any more daughters? Isn't it possible that they are targeting me again? Chapter 57, The Hand of the King. Viserys held the handwritten letter from the Sea King of Bravos in his hand and fell into silence. The whole hall was silent. Everyone looked at the little king sitting on the throne in the middle. They didn't know what was written in the letter. This was highly confidential, but they seemed to see the embarrassment in Viserys' face. Then, Viserys didn't say anything, but handed the handwritten letter from the Sea King in his hand to Sir Geoffrey beside him. For this fleet commander, Viserys had nothing to doubt. After all, if it weren't for the other party, he and his mother would have died long ago. Even if he and his mother Queen Rhaella fled to Dragonstone according to the original trajectory, the fleet's deterrence made the acting city lord and others dare not murder their orphans and widows. Even if the storm was coming and destroyed the Targaryen fleet later, Viserys didn't know the details in the middle. Perhaps the illegitimate son and others wanted to hand over Viserys and his sister to Baratheon, or other plans. But with the help of Sir William, he finally escaped to the continent of Essos and began a long exile. So Viserys naturally trusted the old knight and the coach unconditionally. If he needed to make a Hand of the King medal now, perhaps Viserys were directly awarded to Sir Geoffrey. The grey-haired old knight did not refuse and took the letter directly from Viserys and then read it carefully. Viserys' eyes fell on the to Bravos messengers again. In fact, my mother, Queen Rhaella Targaryen, is dead. Viserys stood up from the cold stone throne, and the sunlight on both sides of the hall shone in, forming a series of light columns covered with dust, casting on the ground. Your Majesty, please accept my condolences. As the messenger, Claire, the city councillor of Bravos, once again bowed slightly to express his condolences to Viserys. In fact, they knew the news when they got off the ship. Please allow us to pay tribute to this kind and great Queen Mother when we leave Dragonstone. However, Viserys just waved his hand in response. He knew that these were just polite words from the messenger. The other party didn't even know that Targaryen could speak Valyrian now, and he might have only heard the name of his mother, Queen Rhaella. Please stay on Dragonstone for a while, envoy. I need to think about what Lord Ferragintalion wrote in the letter. Viserys was hesitant about this matter now. When he got the letter, Viserys could confirm that the other party was indeed an envoy from Bravos. However, Viserys was a little hesitant about whether to really go to Bravos to meet him. Although the Little King had thwarted several conspiracies of the Iron Throne and fought a beautiful turnaround with the fleet in Shipbreaker Bay, which greatly boosted morale. But the power comparison between Targaryen and Baratheon was still quite different. The other party was like having 10 fingers, but he just broke one finger when he took the opportunity. If the other party clenched his fists, he could easily beat him to death on Dragonstone. After all, this place is too close to Westeros, almost within reach. Viserys didn't feel safe at all staying on Dragonstone. Although he knew that King Robert had no warships now, he was still afraid that one day he would wake up and find Dragonstone surrounded by endless ships. So Viserys had been thinking about how to give up Dragonstone and lead the fleet and people to retreat to the mainland east of the Narrow Sea. He could establish a foothold there and then develop with peace of mind so that he could save the lives of his brother and sister and avoid a life of displacement. Viserys had never had a clue about this matter before. After all, as the old knight said before, the free trade city-state seemed loose, but it rejected the invasion of foreign forces. Viserys didn't dare to lead the fleet to invade the Essos continent, which would be equivalent to cutting off his retreat. And now this letter from the King of Bravos brought him another possibility. Viserys was a little hesitant. This idea was good and bold, but it would also bear considerable risks. If Bravos had bad intentions, it was possible to tie him up and send him to King's Landing in exchange for a considerable reward. But Viserys thought that a living self who could cause trouble to the Iron Throne was far more important than the insignificant reward for the Iron Bank. So when Viserys was hesitant in his heart, he already had such an answer. It was just that there was still a lack of someone to support him to do so that he would have more courage to firm his inner thoughts. This was equivalent to a gamble and game. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why Mr. Daniel thought Viserys was better than Prince Rhaegar. He would try to complete self-salvation in difficult situations, would never give up, and would always come up with some unexpected ideas. Follow your majesty's arrangements. The two envoys from Bravos naturally had no objection to Viserys' arrangements. After all, this was a secret talk between the little king of Targaryen and their lord Seeking. They were just a person who conveyed the message in the middle, and everything was based on serving the overall situation. Then Viserys waved his hand slightly, and a guard led the two envoys to retreat first, and arranged to take a temporary rest in the castle. They still needed to discuss this matter. After the two messengers left, Sir Geoffrey, who was sitting on a chair beside the throne, also finished reading the whole letter from the Seeking. Like Viserys just now, the old man also fell into deep thought. However, the old knight was silent for a long time, raised his head slightly, and was about to say something, but he hesitated and looked at Viserys. The young king had experienced too many worldly affairs, and his eyelashes were empty, so he naturally understood what the old man meant. Then he waved his hand again, to dismiss the guards on both sides. Soon, only the old and the young were left in the whole hall, and then Viserys turned his head. Perhaps I should make a medal of hand of the king for you, Lord Geoffrey. The silver-haired boy wore a golden crown with rubies on his head. Under the slanting sunlight, his small figure was stretched to the height of an adult. His pair of lavender eyes were shining, and he said teasingly. The old knight was about to say something, but was interrupted by Viserys, with a slight bitter smile on his face. I don't have the talent or character to be Prime Minister. Chapter 58 Decision. Sir Geoffrey laughed at himself with a wry smile, then straightened his face slightly, and then spoke in a serious tone. But, Your Majesty, this is indeed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The grey-haired old man sat on a chair, holding the letter in his hand, and looking at Viserys standing in the empty hall. As you said before, Dragonstone has no resources and no population. The reason why we can still stay here is entirely because we defeated the usurper's newly built navy. The king who now sits on the Iron Throne wanted to tear Viserys into pieces, but he could only be furious. Without a warship, even if you have thousands of troops, you can't swim across the sea. Even if Robert Baratheon is brave and fearless on the land, he can't stand steadily on the warship, and he will even get seasick, just like a big stupid bear. Naval warfare and land warfare are completely different systems. However, we can't just sit there and wait for death. After all, Westeros is rich in resources and has a large population. Not to mention the rich crown territory. King's Landing alone is a large city with more than 500,000 people. The fesses and farts produced every day make this city stink. The war potential that the Iron Throne can launch is completely unmatched by a small Dragonstone. Even if it suffered a blow this time, the Iron Throne can raise a large amount of funds again in a few years and then build a fleet. The Dragonstone fleet is not only old, but also one less ship for every damaged one. After all, there are not even a few trees on Dragonstone. Even if you want to repair the warships, it is very troublesome, and you need to buy them from the East Continent. Fortunately, the wealth accumulated by Targaryen on Dragonstone for nearly 300 years is amazing enough to support Viserys' extravagance. But even so, Viserys has already begun to be frugal and save every gold dragon, and has a sense of crisis in advance. But, at this point, the old man hesitated slightly. What he was worried about was the same as Viserys's, that is, whether Bravos would abide by its honor. If the other side really tied Viserys up and sent him to King's Landing, wouldn't this trip be like walking into a wolf's mouth and sending oneself to the tiger's door? Viserys stood in front of the throne. The hall was silent. After the old sir wanted to say something but stopped, there was no sound, only the slightly heavy breathing of the little king. The golden crown on his head shone, and then the little hand under the sleeve of the robe clenched slightly and pursed his cracked lips. This was a very difficult decision for Viserys to make, because he needed to take a big risk. I understand your concerns, sir. There was a long silence. Viserys finally raised his head and spoke. The fiery red gem was like a burning flame, symbolizing that the boy's heart and blood were also burning. The boy's sweet voice like a clear spring echoed in the silent hall. But we have no choice now, right? We can't stay on Dragonston and wait for death. And if we miss this opportunity, there may not be another one. Viserys seemed to have finally made up his mind. It was a little difficult for him to make this decision. But his calm brain told him that it was the most advantageous to do so. Not only did the prophet feel the advantage first, but according to the original trajectory, no one on the East Continent persecuted Viserys. Even the Targaryen brothers and sisters were once fostered in powerful families such as Bravos and Pentus. However, Viserys must consider that the situation is no longer the original trajectory. The Targaryen fleet did not sink in the storm. Dragonston has not been betrayed and changed its owner, and the brothers and sisters did not escape to the East Continent under the escort of Sir William. The situation they are in now is much better than the original trajectory, but Viserys has always had a deep sense of crisis. Even if they have made some small struggles, they are still very far away from a real breakthrough. Child. When the old knight heard Viserys' words, he seemed to be a little dazed. It was as if he saw the brave silver boy who was full of charisma in his every move. His greatest charm was that he could influence the people around him and make them closely connected with him. In fact, I'm also afraid of accidents. However, Viserys interrupted what the old knight wanted to say, turned around and looked in the direction of the main hall door, and continued to speak. I'm more afraid of death than anyone else. Viserys wanted to say that he had died once, and that experience was really terrible, so he didn't want to experience it again. But when the word came to his lips, the strong desire to survive in his brain still covered his mouth, and didn't let him say it. However, no one can replace me in this matter. He must go to Bravos in person, to meet his relatives from Dawn. At the same time, it is more important to meet the seeking of Bravos. Viserys needs to do this to achieve his goal. And I think that a living me who can threaten the Iron Throne is more important to Bravos. It is highly likely that Bravos will not choose the short-sighted path, but this is still a gamble. Even if the degree of danger is only 10%, it still means that there is a risk. I'd better go. Viserys hesitated for a moment, but still exhaled slightly, and then spoke. Then I will go with his majesty. The old knight actually supported Viserys a little, and then stood up decisively and responded. He admired the boy's courage. You know, this is just an 8-year-old child. If it were a child from an ordinary family, he might be scared and cry when he went to an unfamiliar environment alone. However, Viserys had experienced so many ups and downs, and at this time he had the courage to leave the protection around him and go to Bravos alone. No need. However, Sir Joffrey's request was rejected by Viserys after a slight thought. If Bravos really has any bad intentions, Lord Joffrey, I'm afraid that having you here won't change the situation. Viserys sighed and continued. It's better for me to go alone, so that I can conceal my whereabouts. If something unexpected really happens. Viserys was actually not as calm as he seemed on the surface. He had no choice. His brain clearly told him that this was a good opportunity, and then he mustered up the courage to make this decision. However, in this situation, if you want to break the impasse, you must have the courage to burn your boats. Otherwise, even if you can live a few more years on Dragonston, it will not change the final outcome. I hope you. Viserys hesitated slightly at this point, because the next words were very important. It involved who he had designated as his legal heir, Rhaenys, or Daenerys. Chapter 59 heir. But Viserys hesitated slightly when he said the last sentence. If something unexpected really happened, a little girl with brown hair appeared in the silver-haired boy's mind. It was Rhaenys Targaryen who always liked to pester him. Although Rhaenys was still a child, it could be seen that she was a beauty. In the future, she would definitely grow up to be a stunning beauty that would make the Seven Kingdoms fall in love with her. Hey, Viserys. And now Rhaenys' heart-melting smile flashed through Viserys' mind. Because of the close age difference, or for other reasons, Rhaenys didn't like to call him by seniority. Instead, she always liked to call him brother, or just call him by his name without any respect. Then, the baby girl wrapped in swaddling clothes appeared in Viserys' mind again. Daenerys Targaryen. When the brother and sister met for the first time, Viserys gently held Daenerys' little hand and could feel the strong sense of closeness of blood, a feeling that could never be separated. Viserys was hesitant again and could not make a decision immediately. The old man also knew that this decision was of great significance, so he did not speak to disturb Viserys. The boy was silent for a long time, but he still made a choice, raised his head again and spoke seriously. "If I really have any accidents, please continue to assist my sister, Daenerys Targaryen, to ascend the Iron Throne, Lord Joffrey." No one knew what Viserys was thinking at the moment of silence. Why did he make such a decision, and what was the basis for doing so? Viserys' words now were of great significance, which was equivalent to designating a future heir. That was his sister Daenerys Targaryen. Although Viserys was only 8 years old, he was in a position. In this game of power, no one would show mercy to him, just because he was a child. Just as the king sitting on the Iron Throne of King's Landing had begun to do whatever it took to eliminate him, Viserys still needed to be careful and try to survive, even if he stayed in Dragonstone. So Viserys had to make this decision in advance, even if it sounded a little cruel, like telling his own funeral in advance. "Did you choose the younger one?" Sir Joffrey was a little surprised when he heard Viserys' decision. Princess Daenerys was too young. She was just a baby in swaddling clothes, and she didn't even have a mother. He didn't even know if she would die. He didn't expect Viserys to choose this younger girl. In the old knight's opinion, Viserys and Princess Rhaenys had a closer relationship. The two children were not only in age, but also in character. Sometimes Viserys was obviously full of sorrow because of some things, but when he saw Rhaenys, he would try to smile, even if the smile was a little ugly. However, Daenerys was his sister after all, and the blood of the Targaryen family was purer. It was understandable that Viserys would make such a decision. After all, Rhaenys had half of Dawn's blood, and the Targaryen bloodline was not pure. "I understand." Sir Joffrey finally nodded, understanding Viserys' will. He designated Daenerys as his heir. If Viserys encountered an accident during this journey to Bravos, then the baby girl Daenerys would become the new Lord of Dragonstone. Then it is decided. Since the decision was made, Viserys did not hesitate. He called the guards outside to come in, and then found the two Bravos envoys who had just been arranged to rest. In fact, the alderman and the chief swordsman did not go far. They were arranged to rest temporarily in a small room outside the hall, waiting for Viserys and his ministers to finish the discussion. They originally thought that it might take a long time to discuss this matter, and they did not have much expectation that Viserys would accept the invitation of Lord Seeking. After all, the head of the Targaryen family is only an 8-year-old boy who may cry if he falls. If Queen Rhaela was still alive and clear-headed, she might have accepted the invitation and gone to Bravos. However, the queen has now been promoted to Queen Mother and has been buried, which is indeed a bit unexpected for them. However, they did not expect that the news came from the other side before they could even sit in the small room next to them. The two messengers hurried back. Viserys sat on the throne in the hall. His small body looked a bit out of place sitting on the big throne. The boy wore a crown made of pure gold with a ruby like a flame in the middle, and his hands were on the armrests of the throne. Then the little king told them in a clear and calm voice that he accepted the invitation of the Seeking of Bravos and would set off in person to Bravos to meet the Seeking soon. The boy's voice echoed in the silent hall. The two Bravos messengers standing below looked at each other, and they saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. They did not expect that this child would actually have the courage to agree to go alone with them to a strange city thousands of miles away. However, after Viserys finished speaking, Sir Joffrey stood up at the same time and asked Bravos to respect the ancient tradition of guest rights on the continent of Westeros and to ensure the safety of the little King Viserys. Guest rights are the traditional rules that the 7 kingdoms on the continent of Westeros abide by. That is, whether it is commoners or nobles, when guests come to the host's eaves as guests and accept the bread and salt provided by the host, the guest rights will take effect. During the guest period thereafter, neither party shall harm the other. Violators will violate the sacred law and are believed to be unacceptable to the new and old gods. This is true in the teachings of the old gods and the 7 gods. Of course, your majesty, The 7 gods and the old gods of the 7 kingdoms also have temples on the Isle of the Gods in Bravos. Cleon, the main envoy of Bravos, bowed slightly again, and then vowed to guarantee. Bravos is the most trustworthy, because it is as important as our lives. Since we have invited you, we will definitely protect your safety throughout the journey, from the moment you leave Dragonston, until you return here safely. Chapter 60 Leaving. After meeting the envoy from Bravos at Dragonston, several days passed. During this time, Viserys arranged other things on Dragonston. Then, after putting on makeup and dressing up, his silver gold hair was dyed blue, and his enviable appearance in the past was simply modified, no longer so eye-catching. But the purple eyes could not hide it, still with the calmness and stability that was completely opposite to a boy, with a thrilling beauty in his eyes, like a lavender gem. The complex runes hidden deep in the eyes are not seen by ordinary people, and looking into the eyes of this boy will feel invisible pressure. This is the fear from the soul, no matter how strong his body is. After the spiritual power surpassed the mortals and reached another realm, it brought a little change to Viserys. If you only see Viserys' current appearance, you may just sigh that this is a beautiful boy, but if you look into his eyes, this idea will change drastically. A boy from an ordinary wealthy family will not have this invisible aura, just like the capacity radiating from the inside out. Viserys was not alone on the journey. He was accompanied by 2 carefully selected guards who would protect the little king's safety along the way. The coach originally wanted to escort Viserys to Bravos in person. However, his body was weak, and his old injuries were occurring. He even had a minor illness. In the end, Viserys had no choice but to ask him to stay on Dragonston to recuperate. In this era of poor medical standards, the injury that penetrated the ribs and was not treated in time dragged for a day and a night, leaving Sir William with an incurable disease. His strong body in the past has also been rapidly emaciated in less than a year, and even his armor seems a little big. Viserys couldn't bear to let the coach follow him on a long journey, so he strongly asked him to stay on Dragonston. Not long after, Viserys finally boarded a merchant ship returning to Bravos from King's Landing in a low-key manner under the arrangement of the Bravos envoy. He left Dragonston and headed for the distant, mysterious and unknown Bravos. Hula, the huge 2-masted paddled merchant ship sailed on the sea. The waves kept hitting the huge and bloated hull, but it was just like a breeze, which could not shake the ship's firm progress in one direction. The little king was sitting quietly in front of the cabin window at this moment, looking at the turbulent sea in the distance, with a little envy in his heart. Bravos is worthy of being the center of world trade, and has countless wealth. Any merchant ship has a tonnage second only to the flagship of the Targaryen fleet, the Black Death, and it can be seen that after some modifications and the addition of rams and weapons, this merchant ship can be transformed into a warship at any time. Viserys personally followed Sir Geoffrey on the expedition to Storm's End not long ago, and destroyed the Baratheon fleet on the Sea of Shipbreaker Bay. At that time, Viserys followed the old knight all the way, saw a lot, and asked a lot, so he knew a little about the battle on the Sea of the Fleet. At least he would not seem so unfamiliar. Viserys could see how terrifying the war potential of this giant city-state, the leader of the 9 free trade cities, was. If the war really started, Bravos might be able to pull out an invincible fleet with hundreds of 2-masted rowing warships in a very short time. The fleets of other city-states were still using longboats and small sailboats as death squads to protect the safety of their main ships, but their main ships were just ordinary ships in Bravos. Then the invincible fleet of Bravos could easily block the opponent's maritime trade supply routes and greatly reduce the enemy's war capabilities. However, the invincible fleet of Bravos was not very deterrent to the nobles of Westeros, because no matter how large the scale of the invincible fleet was, it was impossible to surround the entire Westeros. Moreover, these great nobles would not rely too much on trade, and the small peasant economy could be completely self-sufficient. Cutting off the sea route would at most cause them a little loss, not even enough to hurt their bones. These have already been reflected in the War of the Usurper, and Targaryen's royal fleet could not be used, even if it was powerful. What really worries the 7 kingdoms and even the Iron Throne is another weapon of Bravos. That is gold coins. The Iron Bank's wealth is enough to shock the world, and make the throne under the king's ass full of thorns. When kings or nobles default on their debts, or are foolish enough not to respect their contracts with the Iron Bank, new kings or nobles will spring up like mushrooms after rain with the financial assistance of the Iron Bank. These new nobles must recognize the previous debts and repay the money they borrowed from the Iron Bank to win the throne, so as not to suffer the same fate as their predecessors. This is why the Iron Bank has lent out so much money, but no one has ever dared to default on it. As the Bravosi have a proverb, the Iron Bank cannot be defaulted. Viserys looked at the waves on the sea and fell into deep thought, thinking about these messy things. He had some memories and impressions of Bravos, based on his mind, but these were not comprehensive, and the rest were all the knowledge and folk customs of Bravos that he had made up before leaving in the past few days. A soldier sitting on the side quietly looked at the expression on the little king's face, revealing a little bit of self-righteousness. After several events, including the previous design to kill the mercenaries in the naval battle in Shipwreck Bay, Viserys' reputation has gradually spread among the soldiers. People say that Viserys has a talent that is absolutely not inferior to his brother Rhaegar, and now this soldier thinks it is true. What was he doing when he was 8 years old? It seems that he was still playing with piss and mud. However, in fact, Viserys' brain is now empty. He doesn't know what he is thinking about. He just stares at the sea in a daze. Although he has gone through some simple disguises, he still hides in the cabin for a day for the sake of caution. After all, this is the first time that Viserys has left the layers of protection around him in the past and stepped into a completely unfamiliar environment. Even when he hurriedly fled King's Landing, he was escorted by more than 50 soldiers, but now Viserys is only accompanied by 2 people. However, at this moment, the door of the cabin room was knocked. Bang bang bang. "Master, it's me." A man's voice, deliberately lowered, came from outside the door. Chapter 61 Journey. It turned out to be the Alderman of Bravos. He saw that Viserys had not left the cabin for a whole day after boarding the ship, so he came to visit. He was afraid that the little king could not stand the life on the ship. After all, Dragonstone was a long way from Bravos, and they had to go to Pentos first, rest there, load and unload some goods, and then set off again to Bravos. Merchants actually bear great risks every time they go to sea. If it is not a large business, the loss of a shipwreck is enough to make a big merchant who looks glamorous go bankrupt. So they naturally have to learn to be greedy, and they will only stop when they make a lot of money. However, when he saw Viserys, he was slightly relieved, because the little king was in good condition and seemed to have adapted to the life on the ship. He was not seasick and vomited all over the sky. "Your Majesty, it will take us more than a month to reach Bravos." Bravos is located between the islands at the northwest end of the Essos continent, at the intersection of the Narrow Sea and the Shivering Sea. It is far away from Dragonstone, and this route needs to reach Pentos first, so it naturally takes a very long time. Then the Bravos envoy in a grey-brown robe took the initiative to ask Viserys to take a tour of the ship. Visit? Viserys frowned slightly when he heard the other party's invitation, but finally nodded and agreed. Okay. Then, Viserys followed the envoy to take a brief tour of the 2-masted merchant ship. There were huge sails on the deck, and below the deck were the cabins for storing cargo. There were rowing rooms on the left and right sides of the lowest cabin, and a long corridor in the middle. Although this 2-masted sailing ship had enough power to cross the narrow sea, it still needed some rowers to supplement the power when necessary. And the ship was full of people of all kinds, including small merchants, mercenaries, and people who wanted to leave the water on Westeros and go to the East Continent to make a living. Viserys simply followed the envoy out to take a look and get some fresh air. He was a little depressed to stay in the cabin for a whole day. When they came out to wander around, many people who sat on the deck with a mat cast curious eyes on Viserys. Although Viserys had disguised himself, his silver gold hair was dyed blue, and his clothes were not very gorgeous. He was just the son of a wealthy businessman or a nobleman. However, the boy's temperament in his gestures and the depth in his lavender eyes still made them realize that the boy's identity might not be simple. A mother holding a baby sat on the deck, leaning against the edge of the board. She was sturdy and did not shy away from opening her chest to let the child drink milk. Her black hair was messy, and she looked a little grey. However, when Viserys passed by her, her eyes fell on Viserys. She took a curious look, surprised, unbelievable, and her eyes were a little strange. Then, as if she was inferior, she quickly avoided her eyes, fearing that she would be discovered by this distinguished noble young master. On the other side, several mercenaries who were also sitting on the deck were drinking and playing finger-guessing games. They were wearing tattered leather armor, and their thick sweat hair and body odor could be smelled from a long distance. Their weapons were placed at their hands, or tied to their calves. The group of drunken mercenaries were noisy, and didn't care about the opinions of the people around them, and the people around them seemed to be used to it. There was even an old man with tattered clothes who lay beside them with a layer of tattered bedding and slept soundly. And this group of mercenaries also saw Viserys, whose face was red because of drinking, but they were different from the woman, who was breastfeeding just now. They didn't shy away at all, and looked at Viserys carelessly. Then one of them stood up unsteadily, walked in front of Viserys, and blocked his way. The strong body odor and alcohol on the mercenary hit Viserys' face, and Viserys frowned slightly. He wanted to raise his hand to cover his nose, but at the same time he didn't want to anger these people and cause unnecessary trouble because of his little action. Then the boy stopped and looked up at the other party. "Hey, this noble master." The mercenary staggered and stood a little unsteady. His face was red, and he opened his mouth and smelled of alcohol. He looked at Viserys and spoke first. "The East Continent is not that safe. It's a place where people really eat each other. Do you need to hire people?" Then the mercenary pointed to his companions who were drinking happily behind him, and then patted his chest. "As long as the money is enough, we brothers are definitely not afraid of death." However, the two Dragonstone soldiers following Viserys saw this scene and became furious, and decisively blocked the little king. Hey, sorry brother." The guard pushed the mercenary who was blocking the way away with his hand. The drunken mercenary was pushed and staggered slightly, almost falling down. "No, the young master will be protected by the two of us." The guard stood in front of Viserys and said, accidentally slipping his tongue, and then quickly corrected it. At the same time, the guard pulled out a little from the hilt of the sword with one hand, and a disgusted expression appeared on his face. "The young master does not need, and will not hire you people. As soldiers, who eat the king's food, and receive formal training, they actually look down on these mercenaries, thinking that they have no sense of honor, and are just fighting for money. However, in fact, the disintegrated and mutinous regular army is more dangerous than these mercenaries, and many of the mercenaries are former soldiers. For various reasons, they finally chose to do this business with their heads tied to their belts." The small conflict on the deck attracted the attention of the people who were resting, and they all cast their eyes over. But the mercenary who was nearly pushed down was not angry after hearing the guard's words. He was filled with alcohol and foul body odor, but he just laughed twice, and seemed to not care about being humiliated by others. Then he told Viserys that he could come to his brothers if he needed help. Then he sat back on the deck and ate and drank with other brothers. Viserys witnessed the whole scene, and his frown just relaxed a little. He looked at the mercenary with some curiosity, and then retracted his gaze. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Water Dancer. There are all kinds of people in this world. Farmers, slaves, merchants, mercenaries, even bandits, thieves, etc. And the races are also varied. In Westeros, there are Northerners, Ironborn, Dornishmen, orphans on the Greenblood River, mountain clans in the valley, mountain clans in the north, marshlanders, skags, and even according to rumors, there are giants and white walkers north of the wall. And on the continent of Essos, where Viserys is about to arrive, there are also Dothraki, Bravos, Karth, Lazarin, etc. Every kind of person and every profession has their own different way of life. After all, if you are not a noble, there is no huge wealth that can be grabbed without effort, and you need to do your best to survive. Viserys did not have a good impression of the group of mercenaries at first. It was not because of the so-called honor, but Viserys felt that this group of people were some evil people who could kill anyone, as long as they had money. However, now Viserys suddenly had an idea in his mind, an idea about how to gain a foothold in the continent of Essos in the future. Can I use these mercenaries? After all, mercenaries are popular on the continent across the narrow sea, and he has enough money now. In this case, can he hire a legion, or buy some Unsullied to help him gain a foothold? The boy stood there in silence for a while, but this was just an idea that suddenly popped up in his mind. He still needed to think about whether it could be done, or how to do it. Then Viserys glanced at the back of the mercenary, and then retracted his gaze. This was just a small episode, and did not cause too much commotion on the ship. But how many people were secretly watching Viserys back from behind is unknown. Then Viserys was about to leave the deck and return to the cabin, and then he met the chief swordsman of Bravos who was practicing swordsmanship. Lord Syrio Fall? Viserys stopped slightly, and looked at the swordsmanship practiced by the chief swordsman with some curiosity. The other party did not hide anything, just stretched his muscles and bones openly on the deck. After all, swordsmanship is a skill that only comes with practice. If you don't draw your sword for a long time, even the chief swordsman will inevitably become a little rusty. However, Syrio Fall's swordsmanship is somewhat different. It is as light as an elegant dance, and the sword light is like rain, which seems to be able to easily penetrate the enemy's defense. Viserys narrowed his eyes slightly, and in the depths of his lavender eyes, the complicated magic circle glowed slightly. Under his extraordinary ability, the swordsmanship of the chief swordsman of Bravos, which was as fast as a storm, fell into his eyes, and saw it clearly. Is this the famous water dance? Viserys looked at Syrio Fall with a little surprise. So powerful. This is a technique different from mainstream swordsmanship, using a light rapier, standing sideways to face your enemy, and it looks particularly dexterous. The swordplay that Viserys practiced with the coach was the more mainstream swordplay in Westeros, with big moves, more war-oriented, and wearing helmets and armor. The water dancer seemed to focus more on agile single combat. Master, I'm just a swordsman, not a master. At this time, Syrio also found Viserys, then slightly retracted his sword, put the rapier into the scabbard, looked at Viserys and explained. Although he is the chief swordsman of Bravos, he has no title, and the chief swordsman is different from the King's Guard, which is not a lifelong position. If one day his sword is no longer sharp, or a stronger swordsman defeats him, then he will have to hand over the position of chief swordsman. There is nothing to do on the ship during this period. Can I ask you for advice on swordsmanship when I have time? And Viserys did not hesitate and spoke directly. There was really nothing to do on the ship during this period, and Viserys felt that he could take this opportunity to ask this master swordsman for advice. This is an opportunity that cannot be met. The unkempt black-clothed man was slightly stunned when he heard Viserys' words. He didn't expect Viserys to want to learn swordsmanship from him. Then he scratched his hair. In fact, the swordsmanship of water dance is not a unique secret that cannot be passed on. There are many people who practice this swordsmanship in Bravos. It is a unique swordsmanship system. Syrio is just the best and most diligent one among them. Okay, if the young master has time, you can naturally ask me for advice at any time. The chief swordsman hesitated for a moment, then nodded and accepted Viserys' invitation. There was no psychological barrier for him to teach an apprentice. He had taught others in Bravos before. However, at this time, not far away, a pair of eyes were observing all this in the gap of the cabin door. Then he quickly hid before Sirio's eyes swept over. Syrio also turned his head left and right and looked to the side a few times. He always felt that someone was looking at him just now. What's going on? However, nothing was found. The man scratched his hair in confusion, and then he didn't take it to heart. Time passed in a flash. After about a week, the merchant ship finally arrived at Pentos in the Free Trade City. This is a rich bay city. To the east of Pentos is a vast plain called Flatland. Continue eastward along the road, built by the Valyrians, cross the tributary of the upper reaches of the Rhine River, pass through the Velvet Hills into the Ants Mountains, and arrive at Jidoha. The road continues to extend, connecting Jidoha with the other two free trade cities, Norvis and Koha. Therefore, the geographical location of Pentos is also very important. The merchant ship docked at the port of Pentos to load and unload goods. After a few days of rest, a group of passengers got off the ship, and at the same time, a group of passengers who were going to Bravos paid the fare and boarded the merchant ship. People came and went in an endless stream, and visitors hid in the cabin all the time and rarely showed up outside. During this period, in addition to reading some books given by Alderman Cleon, he practiced swordsmanship with the chief swordsman. Viserys' progress in both reading and swordsmanship was amazing. In his gem-like eyes, everything was revealed, even leaving Cleon and Surio dumbfounded. However, when the merchant ship was about to leave Pentus and set off for Bravos, something unexpected happened. Chapter 63 Kidnapping. What do you mean? She wants to kidnap me? Viserys sat on the bed with a strange look on his face. He looked at the woman who was pushed to the ground by the soldiers below. She was wearing untidy clothes and her hair was disheveled. She was holding a swaddled baby in her arms, and she was crying loudly because she was frightened. The sharp cry of a human cub penetrated the eardrum and really refreshed people's minds. Viserys felt a little headache. Then he gestured to the side and asked a soldier to take the child away from the woman's arms and stay in another room first. However, the woman did not want to hand the child to the soldier. She made an incomprehensible roar and wanted to snatch it back. But she was kicked to the ground again. The woman covered her stomach and rolled on the ground in pain. Viserys saw this scene and frowned slightly, but did not say anything. If the other party was really a human trafficker who wanted to kidnap him, then he really deserved to die. Yes, sir. The woman's child was taken away and taken to another room. The cabin was quiet for a while. Another soldier heard Viserys' words, nodded and explained. We checked her ticket. She should have disembarked in Pentus, but she has not left yet. This morning, when the ship was about to leave Pentus, she sneaked into your room with bad intentions. Perhaps she planned to take advantage of the eve of the ship leaving Pentus and kidnap you and escape. Maybe? Possible? Viserys listened to the soldier's words. His brows did not relax. This kind of thing should not be convicted with such a groundless conclusion. Then Viserys saw the soldier take out a bundle of ropes and a dagger from his sleeve as if by magic. Master, these were searched from her body. The result was clear at a glance. It seemed that she really had bad intentions. Viserys also shut up, and his eyes fell back on the woman. The other woman's figure was not as thin and graceful as other women, but rather a bit sturdy, with black hair, a flat nose, and some freckles on her face. The woman's hair was a bit messy, and her clothes were untidy, but Viserys would rather believe that it was not for that reason, but to make it easier for her to feed her child. Viserys had already remembered who this woman was at this moment. Although they had only met once in the cabin, Viserys' memory was still very good. She was the breastfeeding woman he met on the first day of boarding the ship. She sat on the deck, leaning on the edge of the board, and exposed her body to feed her child without any hesitation. Viserys had met her at that time, and since then, Viserys should not have met her again in his memory. This woman has set her sights on him? Why? The ugly-faced sturdy woman was reflected in the lavender eyes, and the other party was sitting on the ground with her hands on her stomach in pain, looking at Viserys. The two people looked at each other, and time seemed to pause for a second. Your eyes have amazing magical power. This sir whose name I don't know. The woman who was sitting on the ground and holding her belly spoke directly. This was the first time she spoke since she was captured. Even though she was kicked by a soldier for snatching her child, she only mumbled something inexplicably, but did not speak. The woman's voice was a little hoarse and obscure, like the sound of metal friction, but what she said startled Viserys slightly. What? The little king, who was very calm just now, almost sat up directly from the bed. But then he realized that the other party was speaking Valyrian, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. The Targaryen family speaks Valyrian as their mother tongue, but the Targaryen soldiers are not like this. They still speak the common language of Westeros. So the soldier didn't understand what the woman was saying, but just heard the other party mumbling something incomprehensible, like some kind of spell, and instinctively became a little irritated, raising his hand to beat the criminal who tried to attack the boy. However, the soldier's action was stopped by Viserys. Wait a minute. The boy with blue hair was sitting on the bed and was a little unsteady. Then he jumped off the bed and walked to the woman, looking at her with sharp eyes. Then he asked seriously in Valyrian, "What did you just say?" However, compared to Viserys. The woman with messy hair took a few deep breaths at this moment and became much calmer. She looked at the boy who walked in front of her and then spoke again in a hoarse voice. This is a very rare talent, this lord. You don't have to panic about it. I don't know how many people want to get such a talent, but have no way to do it. And it seems that you have also noticed that you have this power in your eyes. Although the woman had an ugly face, she undoubtedly had extraordinary agility and was good at sophistry. Through meticulous observation, she saw the expression on Viserys' face and judged that he had actually known the magical power in his eyes for a long time, but was shocked that she had discovered all this. The woman looked at Viserys and added again without waiting for him to speak. I believe you can understand now that I have no intention to harm you. The woman was also somewhat curious about Viserys' identity. She had noticed the extraordinary power in the eyes of this child when she first met Viserys. Then she kept hiding and secretly observing Viserys. During this period, she saw people who were obviously officials of Bravos accompanying Viserys, and the powerful water dancer swordsman was also teaching the boy swordsmanship. What kind of noble young master could have these people around? Then on the last day, when she tried to approach Viserys and wanted to dig out the secrets carried by this boy, she was discovered by his guards. After a struggle, the woman resisted, but was still caught by the soldiers and brought to the boy. However, this also gave the woman the opportunity to talk to the boy face to face. Really? Viserys was panicked for a second when he heard that the woman had discovered his secret. But then he calmed down. Then he heard the woman's sophistry, saying that she did not want to kidnap him, and the boy frowned slightly. Then he turned his eyes to the rope and dagger thrown on the ground. If he had no ill intentions, then what was he trying to do by sneaking up on him with these things? Chapter 64, Mary Mazdua. This, observing the obvious disbelief on Viserys' face, and following his gaze to see the dagger and rope thrown on the ground, the woman's face was slightly embarrassed. With these hard evidences, it might be difficult for her to explain clearly. She actually wanted to kidnap Viserys because she wanted to dig out the secrets hidden in this boy. For a witch, the brilliance of Viserys was like a pearl in the dark night, just like a starving prisoner seeing a piece of delicious barbecue. So she began to plan carefully. After discovering the power of Viserys on the first day, the woman had been secretly observing the boy's every move and was not discovered by the sensitive water dancer swordsman, and also avoided the guard's vigilance. Her rough plan was indeed as the soldier said just now. The merchant ship has been docked in Pentus for a few days, and this morning it was ready to weigh anchor and set sail for Bravos. Then she seized the last moment before the merchant ship departed, tied up the little boy while he was still asleep, put him in a bag, and escaped from the ship. In this way, when the merchant ship left the port, even if the guards found out that the boy was missing, it would not be easy to turn the ship around and return to Pentus. And this back and forth. Even if the boy's family was powerful and had the power to order the merchant ship to return, she had already integrated the child into this densely populated city-state. Although Pentus had banned the slave trade after losing the war with Bravos, it was just a show, and the slave trade was still prevalent in private. She planned to sell him to those greedy slave traders after digging out the secrets of the boy. Just looking at the boy's handsome appearance, some wealthy businessmen and noble ladies would like this kind of tune, and maybe they could sell him for a good price. By that time, she had already returned to her hometown with the secrets of magic and money and fled. But the woman's plan was very good and perfect, but her clumsy body did not allow her to sneak closer. She even wanted to hide behind a pillar that was only as thick as a baby's arm, which was simply an insult to the intelligence of the Dragonstone guards. She was later discovered and fought with the soldiers relying on her strong body, but was still caught. Just assume that I will believe your excuse just now. The atmosphere in the cabin was a little awkward, but after a long silence, Viserys stood in front of the woman and finally spoke. Then tell me, why do you want to approach me? In fact, Viserys did not believe a word of the woman's excuse, but he didn't want to care too much about this matter now. He was more concerned about how the other party discovered the power hidden in his eyes, and the other party's real purpose of approaching him. Of course I want to know how you reawakened the power of magic. The woman stared at the pair of lavender eyes. When she heard Viserys' question, She knew that this child was not someone who could be easily deceived. Her brain quickly turned to think of countermeasures, but at the same time she was very tactful and took the initiative to explain. The power of magic has been blank many times in history, but it will come again many times, just like the tides of the waves, one after another. And the power of magic is extremely weak at present, almost unusable. At this moment, the woman was still sitting on the ground, but she had become cross-legged. She scratched her messy hair slightly, looked at Viserys and explained. But you awakened the power of magic at this time. So Viserys became particularly eye-catching, attracting the woman to sneak over. And Viserys listened to the woman's mumbling words. His face was slightly confused, because he didn't understand a word. About magic, what else? Tide? Knowing the future, Viserys certainly knew that this world has magic. He even knew about the future stars weeping blood, wizards, the children of the forest north of the Great Wall, and the Green Prophet, and even the red-robed woman who gave birth to a shadow. But he never thought that this chilling mysterious power would suddenly appear before his eyes. Viserys always thought that he was still far away from these mysterious things. He was just a trapped beast who had not yet broken through the situation. Trapped in a cage with a sword hanging over his head, and would die immediately when the time came. However, now these are already within reach, and even came to the door. Who are you? After another silence, the boy's voice, which was slightly low, sounded. His long blue hair hung on his shoulders, and his black velvet top with gold edges shone brightly in the sun. Viserys stood in front of the woman, and looked at her with a sharp gaze, as if he wanted to see through her essence. The woman easily told the mystical knowledge that others could not know, and even some of it was deliberately mysterious. There are only two possibilities for such a person. One is that she is a complete liar, and the other is that she may really have some skills. My name is Mary Mazdur. I come from Lazar, and I'm Lazarin, your honorable lord. The woman had already said her purpose. Even if she wanted to hide her identity, she couldn't hide it for long. So she just opened her mouth and told it all. My mother is a priestess in the temple of my hometown, and she has always wanted to train me to be her heir. She taught me songs and spells to please the supreme shepherd, so I know a little about magic. The woman named Miri explained her identity clearly in one breath. However, no one could know whether this was all she knew. Where is your hometown? Lazar? Viserys was surprised to hear Miri's self-introduction. He had learned some knowledge about the continent of Essos before. Although Lazar was not a very important place, Viserys still glanced at it when he was looking at the map at that time, and then he had some vague impressions. Now, Viserys recalled the location of Lazar on the map, and was shocked, because his hometown was very far away from where he was now. Lazar was in the south of the Dothraki Sea, bordering the Slavers Bay, and very close to the Red Waste and the Jade Sea. It was not even far away from the legendary Shadowlands such as Ashay. Your hometown is Lazar. How did you come here? Chapter 65 Punishment. I once consulted a maester named Marwyn from the Citadel about the secrets of the human body and the common language of Westeros. Miri began to explain why she appeared on this ship. Then, as she was speaking, she changed the subject slightly, and the last sentence was spoken in the common language of Westeros. The guard standing next to them listened to the two people talking in a gibberish for a long time, and finally understood this sentence, but still looked confused. After Miri finished this sentence, she said another sentence, and this time even Viserys could not understand it, because she was not speaking Valyrian. We Lazarene have our own language. This time, Miri's voice was unusually calm. We love singing, worship nature, and our tribe lives on herding, so the god we worship is the supreme shepherd. However, in the Dothraki language, we are called Hesarach, which means sheep people. Miri Mazdur is a Lazarin, and the fate of the Lazarin is not very good. They are too far away from happiness and too close to the Dothraki in the Slave Bay. The Dothraki often go south to destroy the Lazarin herds and take away their cattle, sheep, and wives. Most of the captured Lazarin men were sold to Meereen and other places as slaves, and the useless old people were killed directly. However, Viserys had no time to care about the tragic fate of the Lazarin. He was not a god who could not care about so many worldly sufferings, and he would not be led astray by the topic, led by this woman. I understand. Viserys nodded and then brought the topic back. Then continued to talk about the magic tide. He paid more attention to the magic tide mentioned by the woman. Miri sighed slightly when she saw that she had failed to divert the boy's attention. If it was another child, perhaps she could tell them some interesting stories to divert their attention. However, the boy in front of her was obviously not an ordinary person. Miri sorted out her words and spoke again. This lord. Magic has actually been interrupted several times in history, and there has been a long gap. And now it has been a long time since the last dragon disappeared. No one knows when magic can be revived again. Including wizards, moon singers, and priests have lost their power and become ordinary people. They are struggling to survive and endure humiliation, hoping that one day there will be changes. Really? Listening to the woman's story, Viserys fell into silence. Miri looked at Viserys' face and couldn't help rolling her eyes and spoke again. Of course, I actually didn't have any bad intentions in deliberately approaching you. I'm just a little curious about why you can revive magic. Viserys was interrupted by the woman's sophistry, frowned slightly, and then raised his head. He actually didn't care what the woman wanted to do to him. Originally, Viserys wanted to cut off only one of her hands as a punishment, because she was raising a baby, but he didn't expect the other party to come up to him again. I don't know what the laws of the Lazarene are like. You know, if you were in Westeros, I'm afraid you would only have death and... Viserys frowned but stopped halfway, because women were not qualified to wear black clothes. If she was in Westeros, she would be dead. If you go by the law, my lord, I actually didn't do anything. Speaking of the law, Miri was suddenly not panicked. I believe you will uphold justice. A bundle of ropes and a dagger can't prove anything. Viserys raised his eyebrows slightly. What the woman said did make sense. After all, she was caught before she could do anything. Even if it was placed in the previous life, it was just a crime that was not executed. These seemingly important hard evidence were not enough to determine her guilt. After all, thinking about it is not a crime. If even fantasy is a crime, there will be no people in this world. You are right indeed. But I don't need any reason to throw you into the sea to feed the fish. Viserys crossed his arms and said calmly, give me a reason to let you live. Miri saw the boy's calm and indifferent face and her throat rolled slightly. It seemed that, if she didn't say something, Viserys might really throw her into the sea to feed the fish. My lord, I found that you don't know much about magic. I wonder if you need a magic consultant. I can help you better master this power, and I will only get the rewards I deserve. In order to survive, this woman came up with a bold idea in a hurry. However, Viserys looked at her, and he really needed the woman's magic knowledge. The other party also understood his meaning directly. In fact, although Viserys needed the woman's magic knowledge, he also found it difficult to trust this cunning and strange woman by his side. Yes, Lady Miri Mazdoor, but you need to see your performance to get the rewards. Viserys said calmly. But, I'm a person who clearly distinguishes rewards and punishments. I believe that it was just an idea, and you have not yet started to commit a crime. But even a sinful idea needs to pay the corresponding price. Next, you will be in shackles for a year. Click, as Viserys' voice fell, a soldier came forward and shackled the woman's hands and feet. She will live with heavy chains for the next year. This is Viserys' punishment for her. But only in this way can Viserys feel at ease to bring this mysterious woman who knows magic with him. Thank you for your forgiveness, my lord. Then the woman knelt on the ground to thank Viserys for not throwing her into the sea. The boy with dyed blue hair reached out his hand and took the initiative to pull up the woman who was still sitting on the ground with shackles on. Then he asked another guard who had taken Miri's child to come back and return the child to her. The child was still crying, and the woman with messy hair and shackles on her hands and feet hurriedly hugged her own flesh and blood. Then she gently shook it a few times and hummed an incomprehensible melody in her mouth. Miraculously, the child quickly calmed down in his mother's arms, not crying or making a fuss. He looked at Viserys with his big eyes and a smile on his face. He even danced with his hands and wanted Viserys to hug him. Chapter 66 The Nature of the World. Is this your son? Viserys stood there, stretched out his hand to hold the baby boy, then raised his head and asked, Yes, honorable young master. Since Mary had been punished accordingly and followed Viserys to serve as his mystical consultant, her attitude naturally became much more sincere. Then she took the initiative to explain without waiting for Viserys to ask. What I just sang was the song of the moon singers. They can soothe the emotions of children, calm them down, and stop crying. I once went to the Shadowland and Ashay to learn the art of medicine, and learned this knowledge from the moon singers of the Jugasne. Miri's identity is very mysterious, and it seems that she has traveled to many places. Viserys was slightly stunned holding the baby boy in his arms. On the journey back to her hometown from Westeros, there was a major unexpected discovery, and then because of the rise of evil thoughts, she was finally punished accordingly. Miri's original plan was interrupted, and she could not return to her hometown for the time being. Originally, her mother hoped that she could end her travels and return to her hometown to inherit the position of priest in the temple and continue her mission on her behalf. However, it is obvious that Miri yearns for a free and traveling life. She left her hometown and went to the Shadowland and Ashay to learn medical skills, learned the song of childbirth from the moon singers of Jogsnay, and learned the knowledge of herbs from Dothraki women. During the long journey, she met Marwyn, a maester of the citadel. This knowledgeable master told her all the secrets buried under the skin. Now she has met Viserys, the boy who has reawakened magic. So she is actually very willing to follow this boy, even if she is wearing shackles. She has no complaints, because she wants to slowly analyze the secret of the revival of magic hidden in Viserys. However, due to all kinds of mistakes in the world, Miri has been punished with shackles and has become Viserys' advisor. She is destined to have no way to return to her hometown to replace her mother as a priest. However, the merchant ship has left Pentos, and she has no way to send a message to her mother in her hometown to tell her that she has changed her itinerary. So she can only wait until she arrives in Bravos to do this. After the merchant ship left Pentos, the final destination was only Bravos. The big ship sailed out of the harbor and sailed along the west coast of Essos. This is the Bravos coast, named after Bravos' victory in several city-state wars. Viserys rarely walked out of the cabin and stood on the deck, and his mood was slightly open because this long journey was finally about to reach the end. The time on the sea was dull, boring, and passed quickly. In a flash, more than half a month had passed. Viserys practiced swordsmanship with the chief swordsman every day, but not just the water dancer, because Syrio Fall was proficient in more than just this kind of swordsmanship. He was more guiding Viserys to walk out a path suitable for himself. The chief swordsman really put his mind to it and taught Viserys swordsmanship seriously. In addition to practicing swordsmanship, Viserys also did not forget the old maester's last words before his death. He read books at a fixed time and constantly improved his knowledge. At the same time, he also asked Miri for some knowledge about magic. When the glass candles burn again, the ghost grass grows again, the dragon flames burn the earth, the phantom turtles appear on the wizard's road, the blind regain their sight, and those who have humiliated wizards are cursed. All these signs represent the return of magic, and the power of magic is likely to be revived again. Miri, wearing heavy shackles, explained calmly. She told Viserys what the world would look like when magic returned. The days of wearing shackles were not easy, but the woman seemed to have gotten used to it during this period. At least her wrists and ankles were no longer rubbed to blood. And Viserys listened very carefully, although he didn't know what glass candles, ghost grass and phantom turtles were. But it didn't prevent him from knowing that all this would reappear in more than 10 years. Because dragons will be hatched at that time, and the traces of the White Walkers will begin to appear in the haunted forest north of the wall. Does this symbolize that at that time, the magic tide will return? Viserys' heart was slightly covered with a layer of haze. Now all this has not started. Perhaps it has begun to have some initial movements in the budding stage. However, when that time comes, the world will reveal his most mysterious side. Viserys may also face more treacherous enemies, and his advantage of foresight will gradually disappear. If magic exists, then what about gods? Miri, the 7 gods, the old gods, the drowned god, Ruler, the black goat god, including the supreme shepherd, etc. Although not famous, Viserys still added the supreme shepherd believed by the Lazarene people out of respect, and then couldn't help asking, do these gods also exist? The shackles made a sound. Miri was silent for a long time in the face of the boy's question. Perhaps this question was a little difficult for her, but she finally spoke. Maybe, Your Majesty. More than half a month has passed, and Miri has been following Viserys, and of course she has long known his true identity as a Targaryen. Shocked, she also felt that it was natural. Perhaps such a noble bloodline would contain unfathomable secrets. But after knowing this secret, she also realized that it would not be so easy for her to get out. Although she still didn't want to leave now, if she wanted to leave one day, she might be at risk of being directly ordered to kill by this seemingly harmless boy. Although no one has ever seen his true face. However, the glory of the gods affects the world all the time. Instead of dividing the world by countries, city-states, and races, it is more appropriate to divide it by the beliefs of the gods. I think this is the true nature of this world. The people on the ship could already see the Titan standing on the earth from a distance. This statue made of stone and bronze has its feet on two separate islands, one hand holding a broken sword, and the empty holes in its eyes burning with flames. It was so far away that only a vague shadow was seen. The people on the ship even felt that they could faintly hear the roar of the Titan, and then they began to cheer. They celebrated that this long journey was finally coming to an end, and that they could successfully survive this voyage. And in the cabin, Viserys felt his scalp tingling as he listened to the cheers outside. Then he took a deep breath and spoke. So, what you mean is, the essence of this world is a battle between gods? Chapter 67 Arrival. The conversation between Viserys and the priestess Miri was meaningful, which deepened the boy's understanding of this world. Before, it was like being shrouded in fog, but now it gradually dispersed, and he could vaguely see some outlines. But it might still be far away from what is really hidden in the fog. In the outside world, the merchant ship that had traveled across the ocean finally passed under the crotch of the Titan, the most famous landmark of Bravos. There seemed to be a faint roar in the sky, like the roar of the Titan. Then the merchant ship officially entered the territory of the giant city-state of Bravos. Hula. The merchant ship split the waves, the sails fluttered, and the oarsmen paddled. If you stand on the deck at this time, you can see this amazing and prosperous scene. Countless ships traveled through this city composed of hundreds of islands. Stone arch bridges reconnected these islands. The endless sails, the huge bay seemed a little crowded, the crowds were surging, and the voices were noisy, all kinds of ship flags, and people of all races. They were all merchant ships from all over the world. The farthest ones can reach the summer islands of the Summer Sea, Iban Island of the Shivering Sea, and Karth by the Jade Sea. Even ships from Ashe have come here. Bravos has become the true center of world trade, and the number of ships entering and leaving the port every day has reached an astonishing number. After arriving in Bravos, the big ship that Viserys was on suddenly seemed a little indistinguishable from the crowd. There were even a few big guys passing by them calmly and pushing them aside without any hesitation. Bravos, we are here. Boom. The merchant ship docked at the checker dock. The customs officers of Bravos boarded the ship for inspection, and then passed the inspection and continued to sail in. Finally, it docked at a location in a large port, making an inexplicable huge sound. Then everyone on the ship got off the ship one by one and officially arrived in this city, the first of the 9 free trade cities, and Viserys got off the ship among the crowd, and even a little episode happened during this. In the crowded harbor, Orthief seemed to have set his sights on a gemstone worn by Viserys and tried to secretly take it away. However, he was caught just before he reached out, and then several wallets fell from the thief's body. However, when they arrived at the territory of Bravos, Viserys didn't need to deal with the thief personally. Naturally, the soldiers of Bravos came and took away this person who shouldn't have reached out. It's just an accident. In fact, there are such scums everywhere. The alderman in the grey-brown robe looked a little embarrassed. Viserys was really eye-opening when he followed them along the way and met all kinds of people. Originally, the alderman was still bragging about how civilized, prosperous, and safe Bravos was, but he didn't expect Viserys to be targeted by the thief as soon as he got off the boat. And it seems that this thief is not only targeting Viserys, he also has several wallets in his arms. I just don't know if the owner has noticed that his property has been lost. Yes, I understand. There are many people like this in King's Landing. Viserys nodded with a strange expression. Although this was just an insignificant episode, it left Viserys with his first impression of Bravos. The slight admiration and fear in his heart at the beginning also disappeared. The wealth, trade, civilization, and miracles created by slaves have always made countless people yearn for and respect it. The impression in Viserys' mind before, and the descriptions he saw in books during this period, have deepened this kind of awe. However, when he really came to this legendary city, he did not feel the sweet air blowing in his face, but only a thief who quietly reached out to him. Afterwards, Viserys and his party did not stay in the port for too long. There were already 2 carriages covered with thick curtains waiting here. Viserys stepped on the carriage and then drove directly to the bedroom of the Sea King of Bravos, the Sea King's palace. Gilulu, the sound of wheels sounded outside the window. Viserys sat in the carriage. Under his feet was a silver carpet sewed by me craftsmen. His feet finally stepped on the ground. His heart, which had been floating on the sea, was much calmer. Then the boy lifted the curtain and looked at the strange city outside. In Viserys' eyes, Bravos was a stone city with rivers and docks everywhere. The boy sat in the carriage and saw many grey, golden or red stone arch bridges. The streets of the city were lined with grey stone houses, which were so dense that they almost leaned against each other. Some houses were even built on the river. Almost all of them were narrow houses with 4 or 5 floors high, with spires covered with tiles on top. There were also towering domes and towers not far away. The overall look of Bravos was magnificent and bustling, even far beyond King's Landing. "Welcome to Bravos, Your Majesty." After riding in the carriage, the alderman no longer called Viserys master, in order to conceal his identity. He and Viserys sat in the same carriage, introducing the city that made him proud to the little king along the way. The Isle of Gods, Purple Harbor, Moon Pond, etc. Each place has a legendary story. Then the middle-aged man pointed his finger into the distance. There was a huge arched tower overlooking the Purple Harbor below. "That is our destination, and Lord Sea King is waiting for you there." The carriage drove into the Sea King's palace, passed through a garden and then stopped. Not far away, a few little girls seemed to be playing, and then attracted their attention by the carriage, looking far away. Then Viserys jumped off the carriage. "This is the Sea King's palace." After more than a month of tossing and turning, we finally arrived at the destination of this trip. Even though Viserys was calm enough, he still breathed a sigh of relief, jumped off the carriage, tidied his clothes, and patted the dust on his body. This journey was not smooth. It was not until he left the protection of the army that he really came into contact with the true face of this world. There are no nobles, no power struggles, and no wars. There are only fresh lives doing positive and negative things for survival and struggle. Mercenaries, thieves, merchants, farmers and so on. All kinds of people. They are not worthy of being recorded in history books, but they are the most important part of this world. Chapter 68 Prince of Dawn. Afterwards, Viserys and his entourage were arranged to rest in the Sea King's palace. Viserys had a separate luxurious bedroom, and his 2 guards protected him in the room outside the suite, while the priestess in shackles and her child also had a separate room. In order to respect the other party's privacy, Viserys did not ask who the father of Myrrh's child was. Men died of various accidents, or ran away, after getting a woman pregnant. Such things are common in this era. Otherwise, there would not be so many orphans on the streets of King's Landing, and then these orphans were used by people with ulterior motives, bought and trained to become the eyes and ears of these people. It was simply a tragedy for their whole life. After returning to his bedroom, Viserys couldn't wait to take a hot bath for himself. Because of the disguise and the precious fresh water on the ship, he hadn't taken a bath for a long time. There is a huge hot spring pool in the Sea King's palace, where Lord Sea King and his guests can soak in the hot springs on weekdays. Viserys washed the dirt off his body in the wooden barrel in the bedroom. His blue-dyed hair also returned to its original color during the washing process, and his dirty little face became fair and rosy. Then, under the guidance of the maid, Viserys came to the giant hot spring pool in the Sea King's palace wearing velvet pajamas and slippers. As soon as he entered the palace, the hot air rushed in his face, and Viserys' fair little face also slightly heated up under the heat wave. Although the hot spring pool in the Sea King's palace is large, it is extremely quiet. The water is clean and clear. There is no one inside, only Viserys. Plop. Then the boy changed his clothes and slowly got into the water, revealing only his head. His long silver gold hair was spread out and completely soaked in water, clinging to the boy's fair and smooth skin and slowly flowing down like molten silver in the misty white smoke. It's so enjoyable. Viserys soaked his whole body in the hot spring, then leaned gently on the edge of the rock wall, slightly closed his eyes, and enjoyed this moment of tranquility. It seemed that the fatigue of drifting on the sea for more than a month was completely released at this time, including the foreseeable pressure that was coming. About Dawn's envoy. About how to persuade Bravos to support Targaryen to survive in this land. About the future. The hot spring pool was filled with white mist, and then unknowingly, the boy fell asleep on the edge of the hot spring pool. Perhaps he was really too tired. And I don't know how long it has been. A messy sound of footsteps came from the corridor outside the hot spring pool, and a tiny female voice was whispering. Then a tall man with broad shoulders and a thin waist gently embraced the maid in his arms, and walked into the hall of the hot spring pool. Before he could walk in, the man's palm had already reached into the maid's clothes from below. Then he noticed that there was another silver-haired boy in the hot spring pool, who had fallen asleep because of fatigue. There were a few fine wrinkles and thin eyebrows on the man's face, as dark as the night of venomous snakes, a flat forehead and a sharp nose. The man's black hair was shiny, with a few silver strands in it. His hair formed a widow's peak above his eyebrows, which was a little messy. There were 2 small mustaches under his nose, and a circle of soft beard on his chin and cheeks. He stopped and looked at Viserys' back, especially his long hair, that looked like molten silver, and then narrowed his eyes slightly. The maid, who fell softly in his arms, was held tightly by his strong arms, her fingers grasping the collar of his chest and clenching into a ball, her chest heaving and breathing heavily. Then she found that the man's hand stopped moving and raised her head in some surprise. "My lord prince, what's wrong?" However, the man who was called the prince did not answer her words, and a faint smile appeared on his slightly frosted cheeks. Then he stopped looking at Viserys, turned his head, and kissed the maid on the face. The other hand wrapped around her back took advantage of the maid's lack of reaction and directly and skillfully untied her clothes from behind. The maid was caught off guard by his sneak attack and was startled. She covered her mouth with one hand and let out a soft scream. The man also untied his clothes, and then he didn't care whether Viserys, who was sleeping next to him, would wake up at this time. He directly embraced the maid and sank into the water. "My lord." The man and the woman entangled in the water, as if no one was around. Viserys usually slept very lightly, but because he was really exhausted from living on the ship for more than a month, he couldn't help but fall asleep in the hot spring. Then, after an unknown amount of time, he heard some tiny sounds and the shaking of water waves, and then he woke up slightly. Cough. Viserys, who had just woken up, choked on a mouthful of water and then grabbed the edge of the hot spring pool. Then he saw a scene that was a bit eye-catching in the mist, and the sleepiness disappeared without a trace in an instant. Puff. Viserys spurted out the water he had just choked on, and his eyes widened slightly. He never thought that he would accidentally fall asleep in the hot spring pool, and then he saw such a scene when he opened his eyes. On the other side, the 2 people who were lingering in the water, as if no one was around, also found that the boy who was sleeping by the hot spring pool seemed to be awakened by their movements. At this moment, he was staring at them with a shocked face. "Hey, why are you so surprised, little guy?" The maid shyly hid her face to the side, and the man with slightly curly hair and a circle of beard shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "This is just exercise. Sooner or later, you will fall in love with this sport. Pa." Then the man gently patted the maid's perky buttocks, asked her to go aside, and then spoke. Viserys was sitting in the hot spring pool. At first, he was slightly startled because he had just woken up and saw this scene, but then he calmed down. Because this is deep in the Sea King's palace, ordinary people naturally cannot come here. Then Viserys took a deep breath, looked at the other party and asked directly, "Who are you?" However, at this moment, footsteps were heard in the corridor outside the hot spring pool. "Your Majesty, Prince Oberyn, are you in there? Lord Sea King invites you." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel. Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Meeting with the Sea King. As one of the most important administrative facilities in Bravos, the Sea King's palace is naturally magnificent. The towering arches and towers are all made of neatly cut square stone strips. The passages inside are complicated and lead to 4 gates. It is now the end of August in the 284th year of the conquest calendar. The tale of midsummer has not completely subsided, but the Sea King's palace, which is completely built of square stones, is particularly cool. There are no trees in the city of Bravos, but the Sea King's palace is lush and green, with birds singing and flowers blooming, and servants walking through the courtyards. Viserys and Oberyn walked side by side in the half-open corridor of the Sea King's palace, with a maid leading the way in front. The Prince of Dawn looked left and right along the way, and from time to time he reached out to touch the relief on the wall of the corridor, and then touched his chin and nodded, as if he had a unique insight into the field of art. Viserys only looked at the place in front of him from beginning to end, and it was unknown what he was thinking. The two people's identities seemed to have been swapped. Oberyn seemed to be a curious child, while Viserys became a silent adult. Prince Oberyn. There were only 3 footsteps in the corridor, and they climbed up the stone steps. There was no sunlight here, which was a bit gloomy and depressing. Viserys finally tilted his head slightly to look at the man beside him, and then took the initiative to break the silence and spoke. Well, Oberyn did not turn his head to look at Viserys. His eyes still stayed on the relief on the wall, which was engraved with the glorious history of Bravos from its founding to the present. Bravos has never been part of the Valyrian Free Fortress, but a city-state established by refugees who escaped from Valyrian slavery about 500 years before Aegon's landing. At that time, the slaves responsible for rowing in a Valyrian fleet launched an uprising and seized the fleet. Because they were unable to resist the Valyrian dragon, this group of slaves tried to stay away from the power of the Valyrians and fled north across the narrow sea. Finally, the Moon Seeners led the rebellious slaves to this island in the saltwater lagoon, often hidden by thick fog. These escaped slaves came from many different places and held different beliefs, so the founder of Bravos gave a place to all gods and declared that he would never favor any one god. They included Andals, Summer Islanders, Giscari, Narthibanese, Sonorians, and pure-blooded Valyrians who were in debt and crime. Some of them were trained slave soldiers, some were bed slaves, cooks, grooms, and butlers, and some were skilled craftsmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, stonemasons, workers, as well as fishermen, kitchen slaves, and so on. The newly freed people spoke many dialects, so the accent of their last master, Valyrian, became their common language. Oberyn was fascinated by the reliefs along the way about the glorious history of Bravos, and Viserys frowned slightly, but continued to speak. As far as I know, Prince Oberyn, Dawn seems to be negotiating with the usurper who illegally occupies the Iron Throne. Viserys did not beat around the bush, but asked directly, because he hoped to test Dawn's true attitude from Oberyn, and to find a foundation for this negotiation. Oberyn, who was stroking his beard and looking at the relief, heard Viserys' words, raised his eyebrows slightly, and finally turned his head to look at Viserys. You are right, little guy, but this is not what I mean. Oberyn nodded, his dark eyes were deep, and his voice was unusually calm. I will not negotiate with these people, because I just want them to die. Although Oberyn's voice was calm, it made people feel goosebumps and a slight chill on the back of their necks. Really? Viserys heard Oberyn's words, and his eyes also froze, but he was silent for a while, and then continued to ask. Then I wonder if Prince Oberyn's connection through Bravos this time is just for yourself, or if Prince Doran also has this intention? Oh, that's a good question. Oberyn looked Viserys up and down, and seemed a little surprised that he could ask such a direct and to the point question. However, while Viserys and Oberyn were talking while walking, they had already arrived in front of the reception room of the Sea King's palace under the guidance of the maid. A middle-aged man with dark hair and brown eyes was sitting in a chair reading a book. This room was particularly spacious, with sunlight from the window shining in. The floor was covered with gorgeous grey carpets, and there was a large golden bed with curtains covering the edges. The bookcases on the wall were filled with rare books from all over the world. Lord Seeking Ferragantalion seemed to like reading very much. At this time, footsteps and the sound of chattering were heard in the corridor. The middle-aged man sitting in the chair reading a book raised his head slightly. Then there was a knock on the door. "Please come in." The middle-aged man sat on the chair and casually creased the pages of the book, then slightly closed the book in his hand and said. The maid heard his voice and pushed open the door of the house and walked in. "Lord Seeking, the guests are here." The maid bowed slightly to the Seeking. The man nodded, and then the maid slowly retreated. Viserys and a Baron walked in. As soon as Viserys walked into the room, he smelled a faint floral scent, but after a careful sniff, he could smell that it seemed to be the smell of perfume. Viserys was a little surprised why there were so many perfumes in this room, but he didn't ask directly. Then he looked around the surrounding environment. This room was very spacious, with a large balcony with good lighting, a golden bed and a bookcase. It didn't look like a living room but a bedroom. "Welcome, two distinguished guests." The middle-aged man sitting at the round table did not stand up, but just sat quietly on the chair, crossed his fingers, and then greeted politely. The middle-aged man sitting on the chair is the current Seeking of Bravos, Ferragantalion. "Don't be surprised, distinguished guest." The Seeking seemed to notice the strange expression on Viserys' face, and then he calmly explained. "I have a serious illness and need to take a lot of medicine every day. So the house is full of the smell of herbs, and naturally I have to use the smell of perfume to cover it up." Chapter 70 Signing of the Covenant. The Seeking of Bravos did not hide anything and openly explained that he was in poor health and was very ill, so he needed perfume to cover up the herbal smell in the house. Perhaps it was for this reason that the living room of the Seeking's palace was actually the Seeking's bedroom. However, his mentality was very good. He did not look seriously ill at all. He just looked a little gloomy. Then he smiled and joked. "But I hope you two can forgive my impoliteness for not welcoming you in person." As a person standing at the top of the power pyramid in theory in this world, the Seeking himself was very humble without delving into the political disputes hidden under the surface of the election in Bravos. This reflects his good upbringing, and also because Viserys and a Baron are also profitable for them. Just as compared with blood and tradition, the Iron Bank recognizes numbers more, and they believe that mathematics will never lie. Lord Seeking. At this moment, a Baron also restrained the frivolous smile on his face and became serious. There was nothing wrong with his behavior. He bowed slightly and sat on the chair next to him. He had traveled around Essos as a mercenary, first serving in the Second Sons and later forming his own team, so naturally he could understand Valyrian. "My Lord Seeking." Viserys glanced at a Baron, then followed suit and greeted the Seeking, then sat down on the chair in front of him. There were only 2 chairs in front of Ferragantalion's square table, and it was obvious that it was prepared for 2 people. The chief swordsman Siriofal, who was standing outside the door, had just seen Viserys, and the two had greeted each other. At this moment, he saw the host and the guest sitting down in the room and about to discuss business, and then he closed the door and personally guarded the door. Click, the bedroom door closed, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly became a little solemn. "Your Majesty." The Seeking sat on the chair with his dark hair hanging down his back. He looked at Viserys and spoke first to set the tone for this meeting. "The war of usurpers in Westeros is a heinous betrayal. I personally regret what happened to your father and brother." Viserys bowed slightly to express his gratitude after hearing what the other party said, although he knew it was just some polite words. However, he did not blame the other party like a madman. Since he condemned the betrayal of the usurper, why did the Iron Bank lend a large number of gold dragons to the usurper? However, a Westeros in war is not in our interests. The Seeking looked at the boy sitting on the chair and continued to speak. Although Viserys was still young, his height had jumped up a lot in the past year. In the past, he had to jump down when sitting on the chair, but now he could get off the chair by tiptoeing. At this moment, Viserys was also looking at the Seeking of Bravos, waiting for what he wanted to say next. At this time, a Baron, who was sitting on the side, raised his hand first to interrupt. Among the 3 forces at this table, the power of Targaryen was undoubtedly the weakest, and Dawn might not be afraid of Bravos. "We don't actually need to say these polite words, Lord Seeking and Viserys." Prince Dawn looked at the Little King and then at the Seeking of Bravas, nodded slightly, and spoke frankly with a sincere attitude. Why not get straight to the point? A secret talk involving the entire Westeros was unfolding in the bedroom of the Seeking of Bravas. The three parties sitting in it represented three major interest groups, and Viserys was the one with the least say. It was not because he was too young to be recognized, but because the power of the Targaryen family he represented behind him was too weak, and it was difficult to win too much respect from Prince Dawn and the Seeking of Bravas. But Viserys did not give up fighting for some interests. The Little King made a request at the negotiation table, hoping to get the support of Bravas. At the same time, in order to get the support of Bravas, he was willing to give up some of his interests to the other party. The sun sets. Unknowingly, half a day passed, and the afterglow of the sunsets fell, lengthening the figure on the balcony of the half-open corridor. The chief swordsman of Bravas was still standing outside the bedroom door of the Seeking. There were children playing in the garden below. He heard the conversation in the house but kept silent. As the personal guard of the Seeking, Syrio knew too many secrets and shocking conspiracies. He knew how to make himself live longer. And this conspiracy actually involved a wide range of people. He knew about the Golden Group, the Prime Minister who was once expelled from the other side of the Narrow Sea, an informant buried in King's Landing, a governor of Pentus, etc. They conspired together to overthrow Robert Baratheon's rule over the Iron Throne. The red glow of the setting sun illuminated the leather armor on the chief swordsman's body, his messy hair. His back was very straight, his eyes blinked and then narrowed, and he seemed a little sleepy. At this time, the voice of the Seeking of Bravas came from the bedroom. Syrio. Some of the chief swordsmen who wanted to yawn shuddered at the sudden voice, and all the sleepiness in their minds disappeared. Then they quickly supported the hilt of the rapier on their waist, patted their cheeks to wake themselves up for fear that the Seeking would see the clues, and then pushed the door and walked in. My lord. Syrio pushed the door open and walked in. Syrio. Tell the servants to prepare a family dinner in the round ballroom. The Seeking was still sitting behind the table. It seemed that, because of the long conversation, Ferragantalion's face was not very good at this moment. He rubbed his nose tiredly and spoke. But the good news is that the result of this secret talk has been released. The Little King Viserys Targaryen signed his name on it on behalf of his family in Dragonstone. The Seeking of Bravas also stamped his seal, and Prince Oberyn also signed, but he did not write the Martell family, but only his own name. Even if there are problems with the plan in the future and the matter is exposed, Oberyn is not afraid of being hunted down by the Iron Throne. Because he is not the Lord of Sunspear, it can be said that he is fighting against the Iron Throne in his own name, hoping to avenge his sister. Such things are everywhere in the history of Westeros, and it is not surprising that families and individuals are separated. Without sufficient evidence, whether the Iron Throne will blame the family that implicated him depends only on the strength of his family. Coincidentally, the strength of the Martell family is enough to make the Iron Throne calm down on the matter of Oberyn's bad character. After the three parties signed this covenant, the document was finally collected by the Seeking of Bravas himself and stored in the top secret document library of Bravas, where the defense force is second only to the Iron Bank. Chapter 71. Different Thoughts. The binding force of this covenant is actually equivalent to waste paper, just to endorse the future. However, even if there is a problem, except for Viserys, the other two can use other reasons to prevaricate. As long as they are not captured alive by the Iron Throne, the Martell family can cover up Oberyn's willfulness. The Seeking of Bravas used his own seal. Bravas can say that the Seeking's seal was lost, which is a complete frame-up. Only Viserys really signed his own handwriting on it, and there is no possibility of change or sophistry. However, he is the only one who has no way out. In addition to overthrowing the rule of Baratheon in the future and regaining the Iron Throne, Viserys has no other option. Even if Robert dies in the Wild Boar, he needs to find a place to develop temporarily, stay away from the other party's vision, and don't always jump on the other party's face. Therefore, his eyes are destined to look at the world outside Westeros. He had discussed this with his Prime Minister Sir Geoffrey before leaving Dragonstone. Fortunately, King Targaryen still has a fleet that can cross the sea. Viserys decided to give up Dragonstone tactically and find a foothold on the Essos continent across the Narrow Sea. Strategically, Dragonstone is still used as a springboard, and Westeros will eventually be aimed at in the future. This is his plan for the future. For the Little King, this decision of moving is bold. After all, it completely shatters the foundation of Targaryen, and leads the family back to the homeland that is completely unfamiliar. Viserys' mother, Queen Rhaella, was reluctant to make such a decision during her lifetime. She was unwilling to give up Dragonstone, a dragon's birthplace that is of great significance to Targaryen. However, Viserys is calmer. He does not have the deep-rooted obsession with the family like his mother, and the scenery he sees from different perspectives will be completely different. So in the end, the Little King boldly expressed his attitude in this secret talk, hoping to get the public support of Braavos, even if he gave up some of his interests. Of course, Viserys' request failed as expected. Braavos could not openly support the restoration of the Targaryen kingdom, because that would mean that the large amount of gold dragons they had already lent would become bad debts and could not be recovered. However, after the request was rejected by the seeking of Braavos, Viserys was not discouraged at all. Then he made another request, which was not to seek public support from Braavos. He only needed Braavos to acquiesce to the Targaryen family's return to their homeland, and would not try to interfere. This request was not excessive, because it did not require Braavos to pay any little bit of benefit, just turning a blind eye, and there would also be an explanation to the Iron Throne. In the end, the seeking of Braavos thought carefully, then nodded and agreed to Viserys' request, and wrote it into the terms. For Braavos, their bottom line is that it is absolutely impossible to publicly support the Targaryens, but it is still okay to support the Targaryens with low interest loans and interest-free loans to disrupt the peace of Westeros. In fact, for Braavos, loving peace and respecting bloodline are just hypocritical excuses. The civil war in the Seven Kingdoms is more in line with their maximum interests, causing the continent of Westeros to be torn apart and return to the situation before Aegon's conquest. Even imitating their system and values, becoming a free trade city-state is a better result. In that way, the Iron Bank can hold a lot of gold coins and squeeze the last copper coin of this continent in the name of help. Therefore, Frego finally agreed to Viserys' request. Braavos can acquiesce to the return of the Targaryen family to their homeland, and then he marked a range on the map with a big stroke of his pen. At dusk. The family dinner of the Seeking still needs some time to prepare, and it is not dark yet. After the secret talk, Viserys and Prince Oberyn from Dawn left the bedroom of the Seeking, and walked side by side in the corridor. The footsteps echoed clearly in the corridor, and the servants passing by stopped and saluted when they saw the two. At this time, "Your Majesty," Oberyn walked beside the Little King, then tilted his head to look at him and spoke abruptly. "Prince, please speak." Compared to Oberyn's frivolity, Viserys had always been very polite, calling him Prince, or calling him by name, while Oberyn had always called Viserys little guy. This was the first time Oberyn called Viserys Your Majesty, which even made him feel a little strange. "No, I just said it casually. I think it's fine to call you by your name directly." However, Oberyn shrugged his shoulders slightly and spoke. "I'm just a little curious about how you feel when you are so young and are called king. A king who can't even kill a chicken?" Oberyn stroked his beard slightly. Viserys tilted his head when he heard the other party's words, and the tall and thin figure was reflected in his lavender eyes, but he didn't get angry, just nodded and responded calmly. "I can actually kill a chicken, Prince Oberyn." In fact, at the age of 8, Viserys had already killed 4 people, including Kevin Lannister, and even participated in a war. As for the feeling of being called king, Viserys thought for a moment. "I think it's not much different from when you were called brave by a woman in a brothel." Oberyn's face was clearly surprised when he heard Viserys' words. He didn't expect that the Little King, who always showed a good temper, would fight back so sharply. However, Oberyn was slightly retorted by Viserys, and instead of being angry, he laughed a little, and then patted Viserys on the shoulder. "Interesting boy." Viserys and Oberyn talked while walking. If you look from behind, the big and small really look like a pair of brothers, with the elder brother leading his younger brother. However, as a saltman among the Dornish, Oberyn's skin was slightly dark, while Viserys was fairer, and had dazzling silver gold hair. The difference in their appearance was a bit large. You performed very well at the negotiation table just now, Viserys. If my daughter's status was suitable, I would really like her to marry you. Then Oberyn tilted his head to look at the little king and spoke again for the sake of conversation. Chapter 72, putting the engagement on hold. Oberyn admired Viserys' performance at the negotiation table just now and even made him look at him with new eyes. However, his statement of marrying off his daughter was actually just a joke. He was not going to marry off his daughter, and Viserys was already used to Oberyn's outspokenness. But Viserys didn't know why he was not very emotional after hearing the other party's words. He was silent for a while and did not respond, but asked back with some doubts. What's the problem with your daughter's identity? As the Prince of Dawn, how could there be a problem with the identity of Oberyn's daughters? Oh, they are all my illegitimate daughters. And Oberyn shrugged his shoulders slightly and said indifferently, without any concealment. In other places in Westeros except Dawn, illegitimate children are extremely influential to the family honor. Even though it has become a routine now, the nobles will still try to cover it up. But Dawn is different from other places. For example, Dawn is relatively equal. Men and women have a consistent inheritance system. Mistresses also have a certain social status and a more unrestrained sexual attitude than other regions. Viserys remained silent after hearing this, and Oberyn also rarely spoke for a long time, and finally stopped slightly at the fork in the corridor. At this point, Viserys and Oberyn should go their own way, and the bedroom he was assigned to rest in was on the other side. Think about it carefully, Irion is also a good girl. And Oberyn finally took a deep breath, patted Viserys on the shoulder and said. Then, just as he was about to turn around and walk towards his bedroom, he seemed to remember something and stopped slightly. By the way, Viserys, I will go with you when you return to Dragonstone. I want to see the child born by my sister and that bastard. The bastard was undoubtedly Viserys' brother Rhaegar Targaryen, and the child born by Rhaegar and Oberyn's sister was Rhaenyra's. Oberyn had not seen what his niece looked like before because he traveled around the continent of Essos. Anyway, he had plenty of time, so this time he wanted to take this opportunity to return to Dragonstone with Viserys to visit Rhaenyra's. Okay, I got it. Viserys stood there and quietly watched Oberyn's back as he left. The man's slender figure looked like a twisted snake shadow under the sunset. Then the little king exhaled slightly. In the conversation between Oberyn and Viserys just now, the conditions for the secret covenant signed between Dawn and Targaryen were mentioned. Dawn naturally could not unconditionally support Viserys' return to Westeros to compete for the Iron Throne in the future. Dawn's conditions were very simple, requiring Viserys to marry Princess Irion Martell, the eldest daughter of Prince Doran, as queen in return, after he came of age. However, this proposal was opposed by Viserys, who did not want to make such a hasty decision on his lifelong event. And based on his understanding of Irion Martell, Viserys naturally did not want his future wife to be such a woman. However, he could not give better conditions to satisfy Dawn at the moment, unless his infant sister Daenerys replaces him in the marriage with the Martell family and marries Quentyn Martell, the eldest son of Prince Doran, who is just 3 years old. However, this choice is also unacceptable to Viserys. So, in the end, Viserys still found a reason to temporarily put aside the engagement with Princess Irion Martell. I'm only 8 years old now. This is a matter 10 years later. Why don't we discuss this issue then? At night, a small family dinner was held in the Sea King's palace. The wife, son and daughter of Bravo Sea King Farragh and Talion attended the banquet, mainly to welcome the guests from Dragonstone and Dawn in private. After attending this family dinner of the Sea King, Viserys finally returned to his bedroom with a tired body. Plop. He threw himself on the bed, collapsed into a big shape, and then he didn't want to move at all, just wanted to integrate himself into this soft bed, never to be separated. So tired. For the little king, he was not only physically tired, but also mentally stressed. In fact, although Viserys was the little king in name, he always maintained a trembling and cautious attitude, no matter what he faced. Because there were thousands of ravines and valleys in front of him, he was like a lost climber, and he would fall into the abyss if he was not careful. Just as Robert on the Iron Throne could allow failure, because he had the capital to withstand failure. But Viserys did not have these. He could not allow himself to fail. He had to keep his inner vigilance at all times and often reminded himself to walk on thin ice. A small victory and a small gain were not enough to make him ecstatic, because he was afraid that he would lose his most basic calm attitude. Then he made a fatal mistake, and finally all his previous efforts were in vain, and he might even ruin his life. But at this time, Viserys collapsed on the dark and soft big bed, and the joy in his heart was a little difficult to suppress. Because this was another small victory he had achieved after the Battle of Storm's End, and this time it was a victory won at the negotiation table without a single blow. Your Majesty. At this time, the door of the little king's bedroom was knocked. It was one of Viserys' guards who knocked on the door. Then the guard came in with a tray. On the tray was a cup of steaming mint tea, a few neatly arranged biscuits, and a small dish of cream. He then put it on the table, and was about to leave. Munt, help me find the map of the trading city-state. Viserys saw the guards bring him some midnight snacks, but he still slumped in the bed without moving, as if he was dead. He covered his head with a pillow, and then spoke in a muffled voice. The guard named Mond was slightly stunned when he heard Viserys' words. He didn't know the results of Viserys' negotiations this time, so he didn't know why the little king suddenly wanted to find a map at this time. Understood. But he still agreed and walked out, and found the map of the west coast of Essos from the luggage of several people. The 9 free trade cities are all concentrated in this place, and the center of the Essos continent is a vast Dothraki sea. Then Viserys sat at the desk in the bedroom and lit the white wax on the table. The fire illuminated the small area on the table. Hula. Viserys also spread out the entire map, and his lavender eyes were fixed on a location on the map. Andeth. Chapter 73 Farewell. It was late at night. It was already very late after the family dinner held by the King of Bravos. But Viserys did not rush to rest after returning to his bedroom. Instead, he asked the guards to bring the map of the west coast of Essos. Wow. Then it was fully unfolded and spread on the table. Andeth. Only half of the white wax on the table was burning quietly, and the little king was now stroking his hands on the table, his eyes fixed on a position on the map. Here Viserys pointed to the map. This place is located just south of Bravos, east of the Narrow Sea, relying on the coast of Bravos, the Northus Mountains to the east, and the Velvet Mountains to the west. And the place called Andeth, that Viserys pointed to, is surrounded by these mountains and hills, a plain area that can't be seen at a glance relying on the sea. What Viserys fought for at the negotiation table was such a piece of unowned land. The King of Bravos generously gave this plain to the Targaryen family with a stroke of his pen. However, due to the special city-state system, although the merchant ships of Bravos have traveled all over the oceans, they have no interest in the Andal Plains, which are so close, so their influence on this land is not very great. Although the Andal Plains is the homeland of the Andals, most of the cultural traces of the Andals have been wiped out due to migration and invasion. Now there are only a few poor villages left on this land. There are no mineral veins underground, and the land is vast and sparsely populated, and even the population is pitifully small. Naturally, no one pays attention to it, because there is no oil to be squeezed. After hesitation, the King of Bravos finally handed over this place with no development potential to Viserys. It is called Help, but in fact, this place sandwiched between Bravos and Pentus. Viserys still needs to solve the problem of the governor of Pentus. But even so, Viserys is still very happy. Because of the tacit consent and endorsement of Bravos, it means that the Targaryen family has obtained a ticket to insert into the 9 free trade cities. This is the most important thing. Viserys exhaled lightly and clenched his fists. Although he had seen the location of Andeth on the map in the bedroom of the Sea King of Bravos, Viserys still wanted to see it again. Because this abandoned land sandwiched between Pentus and Bravos will be where he will gain a foothold on the continent of Essos in the future. Even a young dragon needs a sky to soar, and eventually grow into a hegemon overlooking the earth. Otherwise, trapped in a narrow dragon cave, it will end up like the last dragon of the Targaryen family. Deformed, unable to reproduce, died as a young dragon, and even the young dragon bones are only the size of a human child. It is not easy to come here. In the next few days, Viserys disguised himself and took a simple walk in Bravos. He first visited the Black and White Courtyard, a temple dedicated to the thousand-faced god. This temple built of dark grey stone is located on a small rocky hill. The temple is low-key but profound. The whole building has no windows and is dark. The peaked roof is covered with black tiles. The main door of the House of Black and White is a pair of 12-foot high carved wooden doors. The left door is made of fishbeam wood, as white as a skeleton, and the right door is slightly gleaming ebony. There is a moon carved in the middle of the two doors of the House of Black and White, but the fishbeam wood is inlaid with ebony, and the ebony is inlaid with fishbeam wood, which seems to be full of some rhythm. The rock stairs lead directly from the door of the House of Black and White to the dock below. There are endless boats in the river below, but not many people actually push open this door and enter the House of Black and White to pray silently by the pool. Then visitors left the House of Black and White and visited the Temple of the Moon Singers. Because of its past history, the Temple of the Moon Singers is now the most spectacular and popular temple in Bravos. The magnificent snow-white marble palace has a large silver dome, and the milky white glass windows show the different states of the moon. Beside each door, there is a pair of marble virgins, as tall as the statue of the Sea King of Bravos, supporting the crescent-shaped door beam. However, visitors did not go into the Temple of the Moon Singer to visit, because there were too many people here, and visitors was afraid of encountering any problems again. So he just stopped on the boat for a while, and did not even get off the boat, and then left here. Bravos' Purple Harbor and Moon Pond have the best brothels and taverns. At night, the Moon Pond will gather the best swordsmen from all over Bravos to compete with each other, and the water surface of the Purple Harbor is brightly lit, a prosperous scene. Huge flower boats sailed on the water surface of the Purple Harbor, and milk and mellow wine were poured into the water, which was a completely prosperous scene of debauchery. This is the world-famous socialite of Bravos. Their status in Bravos is much higher than in other city-states in the world. Here, every socialite with stunning appearance has her own flower boat and servants. Their beauty was sung by singers, goldsmiths, and jewelers competed to make items for them. Craftsmen begged for their patronage. Trade magnates paid high fees equivalent to the ransom of royal members in order to hold their arms at dance halls, banquets and drama performances, and even assassins fought each other in their name. Time passed quickly, and visitors had a simple tour of Bravos in the past few days. It was indeed a bit eye-opening. He had only experienced this kind of prosperous scene of decadence and debauchery in his previous life. But that was all, and it didn't take a few days. Finally, another merchant ship with official Bravos background had loaded the cargo and was about to set off for King's Landing. It still took the previous route, first arriving in Pentus, then passing through Dragonston and finally arriving at King's Landing. Let's go. Visitors and his group, as well as a Berin, were arranged by the Bravos seeking to secretly board this merchant ship and set off to return to Dragonston. Hula, the brig raised its sails, the oarsmen on the bottom rowed hard, the big ship broke through the waves, and finally passed the Titan holding the broken sword high. Hululu. The wind was roaring. Visitors seemed to feel the Titan roaring again, and this time it was like a farewell to visitors. Then the merchant ship officially left Bravos and sailed into the sea. Chapter 74 Return to Dragonston. The sun rises and the moon rises. It has been more than a month on the sea. Viserys' return trip was much smoother this time than the trip there. Except for a small storm that delayed the trip, there were no other small episodes. Then they arrived at Dragonston safely and smoothly. Sir Geoffrey Weeners and the people in the castle had been waiting at the dock for a long time. Your Majesty, the little king was lined with fitting leather armor, a well-made animal skin shawl, a dark cloak, and silver gold curly hair hanging on the fluffy shawl. He was wearing brown deerskin gloves on his hands, holding the handrail, and then walked down from the boat. It was only less than 3 months since he left, and when the old knight saw visitors again, he felt that the boy had changed dramatically again. The beautiful lavender eyes became more calm, and the white and delicate skin in the past seemed to have darkened a little bit because of the frequent sun exposure on the boat during this period. And he didn't know if it was the old knight's illusion. He felt that the little king's body seemed to have become stronger than before. Although it was now mid-October of the 284th year of the Egan calendar, Viserys' 8th name day was spent on the ship not long ago. Viserys, who was only 8 years old, now looked like a big child of 11 or 12 years old, much stronger than his peers. Fate is fickle, but your highness is really a good child. The old maid Sophia, who fled to Dragonston with Queen Rila, watched Viserys walk down from the ship, and her heart was mixed with mixed feelings. She had served the Targaryens in the Red Castle for many years, and had watched Viserys grow up from birth. She still remembered how Viserys looked when he hurriedly fled from the Red Castle. At that time, Viserys was as thin and weak as a little chicken, which was completely different from his current appearance. Your Majesty, Lord Joffrey. After Viserys got off the ship, he shook hands with the old knight. Then he turned around and looked at the tall and thin man who got off the boat with him. However, at this moment, his eyes were fixed on a little brown-haired girl not far away. She was held by a maid's hand, and the maid was holding a baby in her arms. This is Prince Oberyn Martell from Dorne. Viserys turned around and introduced Oberyn to Sir Joffrey, but found that the other party did not look at him at all, but was staring at Rhaenys the whole time. The old knight was slightly stunned when he heard the little king's words. He was just wondering who this man who got off the boat with Viserys was, why the team seemed to have expanded a little after His Majesty came back from this trip, and there was also a woman with shackles holding a child. However, he never expected that this tall and thin man with slightly dark skin and a thin beard on his cheeks was actually the Prince of Dorne, Oberyn Martell, the Red VIP. Hello, Prince Oberyn. The old knight stood on the dock. His grey hair was blown by the sea breeze, and then he stretched out a hand, which remained in the air. On the other side, the Prince of Dorne, who was watching Rhaenys, was slightly absent-minded, but he quickly reacted, smiled apologetically at the old knight, and then stretched out his hand. I heard your name a long time ago. Snap, the two hands were tightly clasped together, and then loosened. Oh, Prince, you have heard my name? The old knight was a little surprised that Oberyn had heard his name. Although he was knighted, he had been serving in the Dragonston fleet without a fiefdom or marriage. He didn't expect that Oberyn had heard his name. Yes, in Tarosh, many people know your name, even though so many years have passed. Oberyn shrugged his shoulders slightly and spoke calmly. His dark eyes stared at the grey-haired old man in front of him. Although the other party was old, he didn't dare to look down on him. This time, as Oberyn finished speaking, the old knight remained silent for a long time. Viserys had been listening to the conversation between the two people. It was obvious that the old knight seemed to have made a great name for himself when he was young, but he didn't know why he didn't want to mention it. Tarosh. It is located on a large island in the north of the Stepstone Islands, not far from the coast of the disputed land. However, considering the old knight's age when he was young, Viserys was slightly stunned. He thought of a bold possibility. Could it be that the old knight had participated in the Battle of the Nine Copperplate King when he was young? However, this was just Viserys' bold guess. There was no evidence at all, and it was even more impossible to trace the roots. Since the old knight was unwilling to mention it, he must have his reasons. Viserys looked at the old knight and then turned his head to look at Oberyn, and then spoke. In that case, it's getting late. Let's go back to the castle and talk about it. Viserys looked up at the sky. It was already dusk when the Bravos merchant ship docked. Today, the sky has completely darkened, and the soldiers have raised torches. At this time, Rhaenys also hugged Viserys' thigh. It might be because he had been away for too long this time. For a little girl who was only 4 years old, 3 months was a long time. So much so that she looked at Viserys with a little more strangeness and timidity. Then she saw Viserys talking to the old knight and others, and then she regained a little familiar feeling, and then walked up to hug Viserys. The little king's heart softened slightly, raised his hand to rub Rhaenys' hair, and then turned his head to continue to order the servants. Sophia, an important guest is coming today. Prepare a dinner immediately. Yes, your majesty. The old maid hurriedly agreed after hearing Viserys' order. Viserys nodded slightly, and then his eyes swept across the crowd behind him. HMM. Then Viserys noticed that among the crowd welcoming him, there was a young unfamiliar face in the front row, wearing a bachelor's grey robe, with 3 heavy metal chains around his neck, which were black iron, bronze, and silver. Who is this? Viserys stopped and asked. My name is Gunnar, your majesty. The young maester bowed slightly without any hesitation and explained. I studied astronomy under Master Yuvalin, and passed the Maester's chain of ravens in medicine. The Citadel received the bad news about Maester Daniel, and sent me to serve on Dragonston. Chapter 75. Battle of the Academy. What? After hearing the young Meester's words, Viserys' face suddenly became strange. Now think about it. Meester Daniel has been gone for more than half a year, and this successor sent by the Citadel actually took a full half a year to arrive at Dragonstone. Isn't it a bit too slow? Viserys resisted the urge to complain, and the young Meester named Gunther seemed to see the surprise written on the little king's face, and then hurried to explain. In fact, after receiving the news that the old Meester had died on Dragonstone, a fierce debate broke out within the Citadel. The two sides disagreed on whether new Meesters should continue to be sent to Dragonstone under the current situation. One side believed that the system should be changed as an extension of politics, following the will of the Iron Throne, and refusing to send new Meesters to serve the Targaryen remnants on Dragonstone. Because the Citadel sent White Crows to remind Dragonstone that a storm was coming, which indirectly led to the annihilation of the royal fleet, the Iron Throne has been quite dissatisfied with the Citadel to this day. On the other hand, they believe that the Citadel should not have any political inclinations, and their main job is to serve the entire Westeros. Wearing a Meester's collar symbolizes that the Meester is a servant of all of Westeros, and Dragonstone is naturally part of this, so a new Meester should be sent to serve Dragonstone. During this period, the Citadel has been arguing fiercely about this matter, and it has even risen to the level of quarrels. Even Grand Meester Pycelle, who is far away in King's Landing, sent a letter to personally inquire about this matter. Meester Aemon of the Night's Watch learned the news during his correspondence with the Citadel, and then sent a letter to express his opinions. However, Meester Aemon and Grand Meester Pycelle are obviously standing in two different camps. Because of these reasons, the Citadel did not immediately send a new Meester to replace the old Meester. Now that the argument has reached the final stage, the conservative side has finally gained the upper hand. They stubbornly believe that Meesters should not have any political inclinations and should adhere to the fine traditions of the Citadel. So in the end, Gunther, who was a student of the Doctor of Astronomy, was sent to replace the deceased Daniel and become the new servant serving Dragonstone. So that's how it is. Viserys listened to Gunther's explanation and nodded thoughtfully. He didn't expect that the death of the old Meester would cause a war of words among the Meesters in Old Town thousands of miles away. In fact, he didn't know much about the Citadel itself. He just knew that there was a top figure in each subject in the Citadel called a doctor. And just now he learned from Gunther's words that his teacher, Dr. Verin, who wore a bronze mask, ring and scepter, stood on the side of the conservatives. And his great uncle, Meester Aemon, seemed to have known about this. Viserys pursed his lips slightly and looked at the sea in the distance. In fact, if he had the chance, he really wanted to ask the wise and respected old man in person. But I believe that the old man is now being tested for his loyalty to his oath in Castle Black. This is the most difficult moment of his life. At this moment, the long walls and stone steps lead directly to Dragonstone Castle in the distance. A group of people surrounded Viserys and walked in it, holding up the lead torches high, like a long dragon, and the fire illuminated the road ahead. And Viserys was chatting with the new Meester, walking and talking, and learned all this from him. But it seems that the dream of Meester Gunther to serve Dragonstone Island is probably going to be shattered. At night, the air in late autumn is a little cooler. The fur of the wolfskin cape on the little king's shoulders was also fluttering slightly, sweeping across the boy's cheeks, and his hair was also messed up by the wind. Viserys glanced at Meester Gunther and said silently in his heart, who would have thought? He had just arrived at Dragonstone Island and was about to be carried away by himself. The importance of a Meester to a noble is beyond doubt, and Viserys has spent too long without a Meester to consult, so he can't let one go. The dinner at Dragonstone was mainly to welcome Prince Oberyn, but it also helped Oberyn and Rhaenys, the uncle and niece, to recognize each other. The real business was not mentioned at the dinner. After all, there were many people and many mouths. Although Dragonstone had been cleared up and all the traitors were fished out and cleared out in that rebellion, Viserys was still worried. The day after the dinner, in the morning, in the top floor table hall of Dragonstone, Viserys was wearing neat clothes and a belt, with a black-based three-headed dragon emblem woven with red silk and black thread on his chest, and gold thread outlined the edge of the emblem. He sat on the main seat of the map table, with his back against the spacious stone balcony. The bright sunlight half shone into the oppressive castle, lengthening the boy's figure. Half of his handsome face was illuminated by the sunlight. One elbow supported the cold armrest, and his fingers gently tapped on the table. Hula. Sitting in the map table hall, you can clearly hear the sound of waves hitting the rocks below, and feel the salty and astringent sea breeze. On the left and right sides of Viserys sat Sir Geoffrey, the commander of the Dragonstone fleet, and on the right was Oberyn, the Prince of Dawn, the Red VIP. Mr. Gunther, who had just joined Dragonstone for only 2 months after Viserys left, did not attend this royal meeting. He was still sorting out the information left by the old Meester on Dragonstone in the Sea Dragon Tower. It was not that Viserys was too cautious and did not trust this new young Meester, but this itself was the minimum protection for Meester Gunther himself and the allies who made this covenant. This is where we are going to land. The map of the free trade cities was spread out on the table, and Viserys pointed his finger to a location, which was the Andus Plain. Then Viserys' finger continued to slide on the map, stopping at the starting point of the Upper Oin River, west of the Norvus Mountains. There is sufficient water here, and a road leading directly to the Bay of Loras, directly connecting Bravos and Loras. And going downstream along the Upper Oin River can directly connect to Novus, Cotter and Volantis by water, which is an important transportation hub. The little king pointed his finger at this place, and then drew a red cross on the map, setting the tone. Then build a castle here. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.